Panic set in quicker than I had expected. The sheer still silence was intolerable. In a way it would have been easier if we'd been surrounded by grisly monsters. Badger was quivering with adrenaline and fear, his breath shaking, arms wrapped around himself. Twill was whirling every which way, trying to look down all 3 roads at the same time. Zheng stood statue still with the deceptively relaxed readiness of a big cat. I clung to her for support, still staring at the phone in my hand. My mind raced to replay the bizarre things Evelyn had said, or been forced to say, trying desperately to divine if we'd just been taunted or if something worse had happened, back at the house. Twill turned to me, panting and wide-eyed. Do you think we can call Evie back? I'd never heard her stammer like that before. No, I said, swallowing down my own panic and lingering pain. My abdomen was sending deep stabbing pains up into my guts, hopefully just an aftereffect of stress. No, I don't think that would be a good idea. Not if that wasn't really her and Twill. I snapped as Twill fumbled out her own mobile phone, already thumbing through the screens to Evelyn's number. Please don't risk it. Twill, please, we don't know if our phones have been compromised somehow. The shaman is right, Zheng purred. Uren-ju will take any opening, and force it wide. Shit, said Twill. You don't think it got to the house somehow, right? Right? No, I believe that was some kind of illusion. I sounded much more confident than I felt. I was guessing, at best, but we had to stay calm and collected. Or it hijacked the call. Imitated Evelyn's voice, to taunt us, to make us afraid. So was that her or not? Twill asked. I hesitated. Heather, she growled. I don't know. I snapped, then had to pause and cough. My throat felt twisted inside, delicate muscles burning with unfamiliar effort, like walking on a dislocated hip. I think that was the real Rain and Evie, at first. She sounded completely like herself, right up until the subject became well. And Barnslow Drive is like a magical fortress. People can knock on the door, but that thing wasn't a person, not at all. Even if it went for the house, it couldn't just walk in. It couldn't. He can go anywhere, Badger muttered, voice thin and reedy. No door, no lock, no bolt may deny him entrance. No key is complex enough to escape his genius. He swallowed and glanced up at us. That was a quote from the pages we had. I'm sorry. You don't know if that's true, I said, and failed to sound either calm or collected. Oh my goodness. I had to suck down a deep breath, chest constricting inside. Twill, don't, please dash. Langren, Zheng rumbled. I will not save you from your own stupidity. Shushu, it's dash, Twill waved a hand at us, then frowned at whatever she was hearing on the phone. What do you mean, out of range or switched off? Evie's got voicemail, No she has. Twill lowered the phone again, frowning at the screen. I've got signal, but there's no connection. Like she's taken her SIM card out. What the hell? It's an illusion, I said again, trying to make myself believe. The call was hijacked. Our phones have been cut off. Nothing like this ever happened before, Badger said, voice far away and hollow. He was staring up at the leering houses, face slowly going slack. Zheng reached out, grabbed a fistful of his hair, wrenched his head down. What dash? Badger flailed in panic. Zheng, don't hurt dash. Eyes on the ground, worm, Zheng rumbled at Badger as he blinked rapidly, panting his lungs out in animal panic, his attention ripped from the impossible amphitheater back down to street level. Zheng let go with a tiny shove. The shaman needs your mind intact. Alright, right you are, he babbled. Right, Zheng, yes, good idea. Focus. Focus. You arsehole, Twill growled, suddenly stepping toward him, scraps of ghostly flesh flowing together into more wolf than human. Badger recoiled. This is your fault, you stupid little shit. Down, I snapped, as hard as I could, as evident as I could. The effort made the spiking pain in my abdomen worse, clenching and shuddering. Twill stopped and bared her teeth at me instead. Evie is fine, I said. She's behind the walls of a house strong enough to keep out any other magical influence. She has Preem and Rain and Lozzie all with her. Not to mention Tenny. I'm sure Tenny could beat up our disgusting stalker. It would be no contest. The intentional absurdity of my statement drew a tiny humorless huff from Twill, but the accuracy of my reading her concerns doused the worst of her anger. She looked away, still steaming, but no longer about to tear Badger's face off. And we need to focus on getting ourselves out of here first, I said. We can help Evie once we're clear. Yeah, alright, fine. I get it. Twill ran a hand through her dark curls, looking out at the deserted streets again, shooting a quick glance at the way they climbed the impossible sides of this curved plane. What do we do then? Walk back to the house? I know you said it won't work, but we could at least try, yeah. I took a deep breath and steeled myself. Shaman. Zheng must have felt my accelerating heartbeat. I want to try to use brain math to slip us all outside, I said. Oh no, Badger breathed. What? Twill frowned. If this space, whatever this is located in our reality but cut off somehow, then maybe the dead hands phenomenon is cut off as well. If so, I may be able to relocate us outside, and then back again, free of this. I gestured around without looking up. And if we're not in reality, then maybe I can take us back there manually. Twill grimaced. You sure you want to do that, Heather? The shaman is always sure, Zheng purred. I tooted. I am not. It's okay, I said. I feel just as excremental as I look. I'm falling apart here, Zheng's going to have to carry me regardless. I may as well try. I might pass out, but this an emergency. Twill nodded, then glanced up at Zheng. You got her, yeah? Don't drop her if she falls. Zheng grunted an affirmative. Everyone needs to touch. Hold hands or something, I said. Like we did with Lozzie on the way back from Carcosa. Don't let go. And keep your eyes firmly closed. You too, I added to Badger. I don't want you losing your mind in the transition. He nodded, and squeezed his eyes shut, gone white in the face. Twill grabbed Badger by the shoulder. Zheng held me tight in one arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Twill offered her a hand. My stomach was churning with the anticipation of pain, but there was no sense in delaying. Okay, here goes nothing, I said. I plunged my mind into the black sump at the bottom of my soul, thrust into the boiling tar up to my elbows, burning away skin and lighting my brain on fire. I dredged up that familiar old equation, the one I'd used so many times now, the most fundamental of the I's lessons, the mathematical formula to rotate matter from reality to outside and back again. It rose like a dripping hulk from the depths, the machine parts awakening as I touched them one by once. Molten metal slammed into place across the surface of my brain, scraping away slivers of who and what I was, shooting splinters of impossible knowledge deep into my subconscious to burrow and fester. Each figure of the equation clicked down in sequence, the hyperdimensional mathematics completing itself in the span of a hummingbird's wing beat. And then a pair of cold vices closed around my ankles. Dead hands, anchored in deep soil, and holding fast. The equation fell apart in a cry of pain and a sudden welter of nosebleed. My vision blurred, throbbing black around the edges as I hung in Zheng's grip like a rag doll with my strings cut. Zheng cradled my head and chest and let me lean forward as I clenched up every muscle in my body to stop from vomiting. I let out a gurgling cry as my stomach muscles tried to convulse, but I held on. I had bested this formula before. I would not surrender now. Panting, wiping nosebleed on my coat sleeve, shaking all over with pain like the aftermath of an electric shock, I straightened up and let Zheng take my weight. Could barely work my legs. Shaman, she purred. Didn't work. Twill grimaced. She let go of Zhang's hand and let go of Badger, who was looking at me somewhat awestruck. No hitchhiking for us, I muttered, a little bit out of my head. Twill squinted. Eh. We walk, Langren, Zhang purred. For lack of any other option, we did indeed try to walk home. Oh, that is too weird, Twill said, staring back the way we'd come after about 100 meters. I really don't like that. Really mega total do not like. No way. Screw this place. Then do not look, Langren, Zhang purred. The goldfish bowl effect, the leering houses, and the great red brick wall all moved with us, as if the whole world rotated relative to the awful sights above us. We seemed unable to reach the point where the road curved impossibly upward into the space between those dark houses, walking through a silent Sherrowford as normal instead or as close to normal as it could be, covered in a sheen of shiny grease and darkened by soot and grime. Behind us, once we walked far enough, the junction with the bus stop had risen up into the ring of houses and jumbled streets, all details rapidly lost to sight. Where we'd stood only minutes before was pulled up onto the side of the Goldfish Bowl plain. The effect was dizzying to watch. We all tried to keep our gazes less than 100 meters ahead, on the relatively normal road as it descended from the illusion above. I did wonder what would happen if we split into two groups and walked in different directions, but decided not to risk any experiments. I didn't even speculate out loud, we may have had a hidden eavesdropper. Twill went in front, taking point as Rain liked to call it, and stayed in full-on werewolf mode. Why not, we reasoned, there was nobody here to see. We made our way down the middle of the road, slow and cautious, no leaping walls or sprinting at speed, all the better to spot an ambush if our corpulent stalker decided to have another go. Badger stayed in the middle, partly so Zheng could keep an eye on him, and Zheng herself brought up the rear, but never too far away. I rode on Zheng's back again, exhausted beyond words, my eyelids like lead. Attempted brain math had drained me down to fumes. Combined with the stabbing pains in my abdomen and the aftermath of the screech and the lingering ravenous hunger, I felt barely present, a numb sack of meat clinging to my packmate's back. Even my phantom limbs were limp, wrapped around Zheng in an embrace she couldn't feel, like an injured squid with a friendly shark. I'm sorry Zheng, there's still nosebleed, I can't dash. Bleed on me, shaman, she'd purred. I knew she'd never drop me. I could have slept like this, if only we were elsewhere. Sherrowford degenerated as we walked. Hastings Road could have been mistaken for normal, on a rough night, in the dark, after a storm, but by the time we reached Sparrow Street, the city at ground level had transformed into a dark parody. The houses were coated with grime, coal dust and soot and pollution, their windowpanes darkened from the inside by layers of dirt, brickwork eaten away by lichen and pale moss. The garden walls were coated in disgusting grease that made my skin crawl, and the gardens themselves were thin with dead grass, littered with old kitchen appliances or piles of rubbish. Streetlights seemed dimmer as we passed, parked cars had faded paint jobs, and the gutters were clogged with rotting organic matter like leaf mulch or mud, with tiny white worms writhing within. Her challenge echoed away between the houses. Calm, Langren, Zheng purred. Uren Zhu wants you tormented, said Zheng. I'll show it bloody torment. Twill gestured at the dark and filthy houses. What about all the people? Come on, there was people sleeping in these houses, right? It's the middle of the night. They can't all have vanished. Not a single light shone in any window. Not a whisper moved behind any curtain. We're not in Sherrowford, I croaked. We crept on a few more steps in tense silence. Zheng turned her head very slightly, meeting my eyes sidelong across her own shoulder. What is your plan, shaman? She whispered. Get home. Maybe there. I will fight anything for you, she whispered on, even Uren Zhu, though I cannot win. But I do not know how to get you out of this gullet. Zheng's warmth down my front made me feel so safe, but here it was a false hope. I tried to nod. I love you too, Jing. I'll get us out. Get us out, I whispered back. I'll think of something. Up ahead, Twill stopped by a low garden wall, gritting her teeth at one of the worm-eaten wooden doors. I could go ring a doorbell, she said. See if anybody's home. Langren, Jing rumbled a warning. Twill, no dash, I croaked, but it was too late. Twill was already vaulting the low wall, onto the patch of scraggy grass that passed for a lawn. She trotted up onto the front step and pressed the doorbell twice, bouncing on her wolf-pad paws and rolling her furred shoulders, ready to spring away or throw a punch. Jing stopped with me on her back, a good safe distance away. Badger scurried behind us. Bad plan, hey, he was muttering to himself. Bad plan, bad plan. What is with this werewolf stuff, man? Hey hey. Twill called up at the house. Anybody home? Twill, leave it, please, I said. Quiet, shaman, Jing purred. I shut my mouth. Twill jabbed the doorbell twice more. Seconds ticked by, maybe a whole minute, but nothing happened. My phantom limbs tried to ready themselves, sluggish and tugging on my bruises. Eventually Twill let out a huge grumbling huff and shrugged her shoulders. Guess that answers that, she sighed. Twill looked back at us over one shoulder and pulled a self-deprecating smirk with her wolf snout, a very strange sight. Made myself look like a right arse, didn't dash. Twill. I screamed. At the moment she'd turned to look over her shoulder, the door had begun to open, a dark crack widening with silent glacial slowness. When I screamed, a fat pale arm squirmed out through the gap like a great albino worm forcing itself through corpse flesh. Twill whirled just in time, leaping back with a yelp, stumbling on the house's front step. The slavering mouth in the big man's palm snapped razor teeth shut on empty air, an inch from Twill's head. She scrambled back, panting and wild. The door and frame bulged outward, creaking and warping as a giant bulk pressed against them from behind. Back up, Langren, Jing rumbled. The mouth in the palm opened wide, and curled red lips into a toothy smile, flickering out a wet red tongue as a whispering filled the air, soft and serpentine and full of secrets. I tried to hiss again, but only croaked. I wanted to clamber off Zheng's back and what? I ached all over, my whirling phantom limbs were no help, all they did was send shooting pains up my bruised flanks. Zheng held tight around my thighs, ignoring my squirming to get down. You cannot fight it dash, Zheng raised her voice, but Twill was already hurling herself at the arm. And in a motion that made my eyes water, she failed to connect. It was like watching an optical illusion in real time. Twill's claws seemed to sail through the place where her target should be, her motion itself revealing that the big man's arm was actually at a totally different angle. It was impossible, a trick of the light that made my eyes water and forced a pained groan from Badger. Twill sailed past and hit the wall with a surprised thump, and the mouth hand went for her again, opening wide to take a chunk out of her scalp. But Twill was fast. And the big man was trapped behind a door. She dropped to her belly, rolled beneath his reach, and came up level with his giant hinge of an elbow, ready to rip into greasy flesh, claws angled to disarticulate, and Deb won his joint with the first strike, but then his arm slithered back as quick as it had thrust forward, folds of loose skin gathering and bunching against the door and frame for a split second, before the whole mass vanished back into the gap. The door slammed shut. Langren, stop, Zheng rumbled. I was still squirming, instinct desperate to get down and drag Twill back. Twill's fourth kick knocked the front door clean off its hinges. The worm-eaten wood crashed into the darkness of an unlit corridor. Empty. No big man. Nothing to sink her claws into. Twill made an incoherent sound of animal rage through her gritted teeth. She kicked at the door frame and whirled, looking for something to fight, making fists with her claws. Twill. I tried to snap, but the word came out as a cough. Twill, for pity's sake, stop, I wheezed. Please. It's trying to trap us, to lure us into getting bitten, to give us the creeps. Stop. Well, it's working. Twill snapped. But she did rapidly simmer down, heaving for breath and hanging her head as she stepped back over the wall to rejoin us in the street. She shot dark looks up and down the road, and back over her shoulder at the empty toothless mouth of the broken doorway. She wouldn't meet anybody's eyes, flexing her claws and hunching her shoulders. I hate this, she hissed. Twill, I tried again, more gentle this time, looking down at her from over Zheng's shoulder. I know you do, but we need you to stay alert and not get distracted. If we do get attacked, you need to be on your toes. Stay frosty, she said, almost mockingly, but then grimaced and shrugged. Sorry I'm like this. I know it's no good. There is no shame in courage, Langren, Zheng said. Yeah, but it's supposed to bloody well work, innit? Twill huffed, and then turned to lead the way again. I'll try to keep a lid on myself. Sorry, Heather. Wait, Twill, I croaked. If this thing is trying to get to us, you need to speak your mind. Don't let it needle you. She shrugged. Wouldn't meet my eyes. Already have. I struggled to marshal my thoughts. I ached all over, with pain and exhaustion, but Twill needed help or she wouldn't get through this. I knew this landscape, this nature of landscape, this barren waste, far better than she did. On some level I felt like I understood the big man. A rival predator. I knew all the tricks, because I'd learned them in the abyss. Twill would be baited by a flickering among the rocks, a stray tendril in the shadows, a piece of odd-looking coral, diverted away from us and hunted down. Twill, what did you mean earlier, when you said this is what you were made for? I tried. Twill finally looked up and blinked at me. My granddad, right? I'm sorry. SWHY he made me a werewolf, she said, and her voice brimmed with sudden pride. I mean screw whatever Evie says, the old man is dead. He made me a werewolf so I could deal with stuff like this, when it gets sent against my family, against the church. That's why I'm like this, that's what I'm meant to be good at. Fighting monsters, yeah. But it's not working, is it? Not this time. I think this is beyond any of us, I told her. There's no shame in that either. Twill shrugged and gave me an awkward wave. I just don't get what the hell's going on. Look, I'll be alright, let's just keep moving, yeah. Good idea, Badger added from behind us. Twill shot him a nasty look. 1 foot in front of the other, Langren, Zheng purred. I have your back. Twill and Zheng shared a very different sort of look. After a moment, Twill swallowed and nodded. We carried on, down dark streets clogged with filth and grease and oily sheens on every surface. A stench was rising on the night air, like old cabbage and rotten eggs and fish left in the sun. Twill began to breathe through her mouth to drown out the worst of the smell, Wolf's jaw hanging open. Once or twice I raised my eyes and risked a look at the vast ring wall above us, and the moon in the sky. At least the moon seemed unblemished. Zheng, I mumbled from Zheng's shoulder, trying to raise my croaking voice as much as I could so Twill could hear too. I had to keep us together, keep our spirits up, keep our thoughts focused on what we could understand. Shaman. Why are you SC-? I caught myself. Why are you so cautious of this big fat man? Mr. Blobby, if that's what we're calling him. Not to put too fine a point on this, but I have seen you gleefully fight a building once before. Uren-ju cannot be fought. And a tower block can. Twill shot over her shoulder. I've heard the story, you doing your Kool-Aid Man impression. You are not listening, Zheng purred. I fear no physical contest, no god of this world or the shaman's dark sea. But Uren-ju does not fight with muscle and fist. It is no outsider. It is no god. It was a monkey once, a wizard. Much worse. I blinked several times in surprise, trying to process this fact. A person? I asked. That was a human being. Once. Makes sense, trying to scare us like this, Twill growled. If it was some alien from beyond, it wouldn't be trying to freak us out on purpose. Bastard. That's not what it says in the book, Badger spoke up quietly, without raising his eyes. In the photocopies from the book, I mean. It wrote the book, Zheng purred. How do you know that? I asked. Zheng said nothing for several paces, brooding in silence as we rounded the corner of another street. The road surface itself was caked with gunk, oil runoff and grime, and the drains were clogged with black rotting filth, forming puddles of stagnant water. A wizard had a theory, about a book, Zheng eventually rumbled as we crept down the middle of the street. The low, soft purr of her voice soothed my anxiety a little, even if she was talking about horrible subjects. A song wizard, she said. His name was Lu Bai. I knew him 29 years, with the cons. Used me as a sounding board when he couldn't get his fellows to listen, and my bindings were such that I was not permitted to rip his tongue out and gut him, so I heard most of it. The book was an unnamed rotting thing he had picked up in Samarkand, but when he tried to lead the rest of us back to the bookseller, the place was gone. He swore blind that the bookseller had not been truly human, but something else wearing the skin of one of you monkeys, a man so obese he should not have been alive. Sounds like our friend, Twill grunted. Perhaps, Jin continued. Lu Bai swore the book contained instructions for a contract of power, for the shaping of flesh. A contract with a much older wizard who had been beyond, to a place of endless cold water, where the reshaping of flesh was achievable at but a thought. I shivered with recognition, no longer soothed. The abyss? I whispered. That thing is a person who returned from the abyss? Like me? Zheng shrugged gently, not wanting to jostle me too hard on her shoulders. That is what Lu Bai believed. None of the other wizards could see this in the rotting book. They saw only diseased ramblings. The road curved to the right, past houses fallen into deep disrepair, their windows blackened and their roofs threadbare. The garden walls were covered in a tiny black filigree of creeping fungus. We weren't too far from home now. I do not know when he made the deal. In a dream, perhaps, Zheng purred. But over several weeks he grew fat. Weeping sores opened in both his palms, and the edges of the wound seemed to twitch like lips. He drooled, soiled himself, stumbled about in a daze. The others shunned him. He was confined to his tent. He was going to be left behind when the army next moved. None had seen him for days when he finally emerged, but he was not Lu Bai anymore. Uren Ju had found a new host. Badger kept glancing back over his shoulder, eyes growing more horrified with every turn of Zheng's account. He was squeezing his wounded hand tight inside the end of his bloodied sleeve. What, the fat guy possessed him? Twill asked. Or used him as a gateway, or a lighthouse, Zheng purred. Or ate him for sport. I do not know. Half the camp burned that night. The warriors could not stop him, though none lacked courage. He was always where their weapons were not. He declined every fight, and bit every arm turned against him. I can move in the blink of an eye, but even I cannot be in two places at once. We lacked the means to bring Uren Ju to battle. He left when he grew bored, simply ceased to be. Not because we drove him off. I was having trouble concentrating on Zheng's story. That greasy pale fat man, that obscene headless thing, that was something like me. A human being who had journeyed into the abyss between spheres, like I had. That grotesque mountain of pale meat, was that his homo abyssus? The warriors who were bitten did not heal, Zheng was saying. Their wounds turned infected, would not be cleaned with either fire or steel, or even amputation. The sickness was in the blood. They suffered dreams and waking visions of Uren Ju offering them a contract, to end the pain. Many slew themselves, many others turned up dead, many walked off into the steppe alone. All right, don't get bit, Twill said. Evie already told us that part. I met it once again, hundreds of years later, Jing purred. It took a wizard who owned me at the time. She had been dabbling in dubious books, but she could not possibly have had the very same tome as Lu Bai. That time Uren Zhu simply strode out of a locked room. He took her to wherever he takes his prey, but I just stood and watched. I was below his notice. I think what we see of him is a projection, Badger spoke up, voice unsteady. He glanced back over his shoulder at Zhang and I, then hurried to face forward again, keeping his eyes carefully on the ground. Speak up, worm, Zhang rumbled. It's like he struggled for a moment, then wet his lips and took a deep breath. Imagine if we were all two-dimensional shapes, right? Bear with me here a sec, okay? Like if people were all circles, squares, triangles, whatever. Then imagine a three-dimensional shape comes to visit us. We'd only see one projection of it where it intersects with our world on a 2D plane, not the whole thing. Right? Like Flatland, I croaked. Yeah, Badger nodded. He looked back, the brightest and most alert I'd seen him so far. So like, the big man, and things like him, they're like a 5 or 6 or 7-dimensional shape, visiting us shapes that only move and see in 3 dimensions. 4 dimensions if you count time, I guess. Get it? Wizard filth, Zheng rumbled. Badger flinched and stumbled, like he wanted to run from her. I get it, I spoke up. Let him speak, Zheng. I think this might be valuable. Or at least it would keep our minds focused on something other than the grease and filth and decay all around. So that's why the big man can be in multiple different places, and why we can't touch him, but he can touch us if he wants to, Badger stammered on. He's just one projection of a larger entity, and he can rotate away from us whenever he wants. Like the messenger, Twill piped up from in front. Remember that, Heather? Back in the medieval metaphysics room? I jumped straight at it, but it didn't even have to dodge. I do remember, I croaked softly. Where'd you get all this from anyway? Twill growled at Badger. Learned it from Sorry, mostly, he said. I'm not as stupid as I look. And I know I look really stupid, right? Could fooled me. I did go to uni, you know. What? Twill squinted back at him. What did you study there? Maths, Badger said. Skinda how I got into the cult. He sighed and fell silent, as we crept along the final stretch of filth-streaked road before the turning into Barnslow Drive. This corner, this street, had become so familiar to me over the last half a year. My Cape of Good Hope before warm sanctuary and real family. But this place was not really Sherrowford, not right now. The nearby houses were coated with dirt and grime, the pavement smeared with unspeakable black slime, the drain gratings submerged beneath a scum of oily dark water. The overhanging trees on the opposite side of the road were leafless and dead, dotted with black fungal infection and patches of rot. Defamiliarization crept over me, a sense of spiritual vertigo, and I had to resist the urge to bury my face in Zheng's shoulder and screw my eyes shut. We reached the stretch of pavement opposite home. Great, Twill growled. I don't know what I'd expected to find at number 12, Barnslow Drive. A signpost to the exit? A secret door back into the real world? Evelyn and Rain, waiting to rescue us? An idea, inspiration, a clue at least. The house was an even worse wreck than the other mockeries in this ruined place. All the lifetimes of effort which had gone into holding the building together in reality were absent here. Missing tiles left the buckled roof open to the elements in several places, the walls were covered in dark creeping ivy thick as blankets, and the brickwork was loose and crumbling. The windows were streaked with black filth from the inside, and the front garden was overgrown with waist-high weeds, thick grasses, and twisted thorns. As we stared in crushed hope, I saw small scuttling insects dart from under the eaves and vanish into cracks in the walls. Nobody lived here. What now, shaman? Zheng rumbled. I stared at the house, feeling violated. My home, even as an illusion, reduced to This? Was this meant to be a vision of the future, or a stab at my heart? Hey, Twill suddenly barked. Hey, is that Evie? Guys, there's a face in the window. Don't you see that? Twill pointed, whirling to us and then back again. That's Evie. It must have got her, it must have. All I saw was a white smudge on the other side of a second-floor window. Fungus on the glass. Twill, I said, slowly and carefully. That's not Evie. That's nothing. Twill frowned up at the window, squinting and blinking her eyes. But what if she's inside dash? She isn't, I said, hard as I could. Twill, don't look at it. Look at me instead. Twill, please. If a regular house was a trap, this is definitely a trap. Don't be stupid. Stop looking at it. We need a way out, shaman, Jing murmured. I know, I whispered back. I just can't think of anything. I could try brain math again, try to comprehend this place. It'll be difficult dash. No, shaman. We need a way out, quickly. I know, I dash. Guys, Twill said. She was looking directly up. Is it just me, or does the big red wall look taller? I followed her gaze, craning my neck up past the rows of dark terraced houses, toward the very top of that impossibly giant ring wall of scabby red. Twill was right. As if reaching toward the moon in the center, the wall seemed taller. Almost like we were sinking deeper. Or the opening was getting narrower. It does, I admitted. Oh no, Badger murmured. The way out is closing up. It's closing up. It's over. We are in his mouth, Jing rumbled. Behind his teeth. We must climb out, before he finishes chewing, but I cannot grasp the walls to pull us up. Jing blinked at her, once, slowly. Shaman. I am trying to think of something, I stammered. Maybe if I try brain math again, try something different, try dash. Buzz. We all jumped out of our collective skin when my phone went off, buzzing in my coat pocket. Twill bristled all over and Badger gasped and I felt like I was going to have a heart attack, but Jing held fast. With one shaking hand I fumbled my phone out as it kept ringing. It's Evie, right? Twill asked. I shook my head. I don't recognize the number. It's him, Badger said. Taunting us. It must be. Don't answer it. Shut up, you prat, Twill growled at him. It might be Evie, giving us a way out. Shaman, Jing purred, and nodded out into the street. Decide quickly. I followed her gaze, and saw that the blocked drains along the curb were overflowing more than before, flooding the entire road with a thin layer of backed-up sewer water, with disgusting oily patches and dark substances floating in the liquid. Bubbles of rank gas rose from the depths of the drain entrances, popping softly in the silence. The phone kept buzzing in my hand. Okay, I said, phantom limbs rising to defend me from an unseen threat. Everyone brace yourselves. I pressed the answer call button, and held the phone out at arm's length, heart racing as I waited for the trap to spring shut, ready to counter it at the speed of thought. Morel? Asked a voice from the phone speaker. Dead flat, utterly cold, the voice of a predatory lizard. I'd recognize that voice anywhere. I was so surprised I forgot to be afraid for a moment, and jammed the phone against my ear in shock. Stack. I said. Amy. Morel, she repeated. Her voice was a little distorted by poor connection, but it was absolutely Amy Stack. What are you, is this really you? I asked. A beat of silence. I swore I could feel the exasperated sigh. You asked me to call you, she said. I boggled at that. Jing narrowed her eyes, Twill shrugged wide, both of them able to overhear the conversation and just as confused as I was. I Stack, we're in the middle of a crisis right now, I said quickly. Did you call by chance, or did Evelyn contact you, or dash? You told me to call you, Morel, Stack said, level and calm. You're standing in front of me right now, and I don't know how you got in here. But I'm talking to you as well, on the phone. I don't want to know. Here. The phone changed hands with a rustle. Heather? Can you hear me? It was my own voice. Sevens? I asked. Unless there's another identical copy of you running around Sherrowford, yes, it's me, said Seven Shades of Sunlight, in an irritatingly accurate copy of my own voice, complete with that touch of patronizing intellectualism in her tone. And at the moment it's also my exact words reaching you. We have a few moments before that boorish gentleman interrupts us. Are you coming to help? I asked. Help? Sevens echoed. Oh dear, oh no, I absolutely cannot come in there. That Philistine would run rings around me and bite both my hands off. We're simply not evenly matched, I'm not capable of that. I suppressed an urge to slap her. I know this doesn't fit your delicate theatrical sensibility, but I can hardly conclude a sweeping lesbian romance for your enjoyment if we all get drowned in rising sewer water. I glanced at the road. The blackened, scum-filled water was an inch deep now, and still rising. Twill shuffled away from the curb, baring her teeth at the water. Sewer water? Sevens asked. Ugh. Oh dear, that means he already knows. He's panicking though, which is probably a good sign. Knows what? Sevens, are you helping or not? What is this phone call even for? To open another connection, of course, Sevens said with that infuriating hint of smugness me at my absolute worst, when I thought I was being clever. I've sent an acquaintance, to help guide you out. I can't vouch for her quality or her intentions, because I've known her for all of about 15 minutes, but she was very insistent, and I don't know why anybody would willingly throw themselves down that particular gullet for anything less than deepest love. Why dash, I tried to gather my thoughts. Why not call from Rain or Evelyn's phone? What does Stack have to dash? Seven Shades of Heather sighed, losing her patience. Because he's already found and closed those connections. You needed a fresh one, and if I showed myself to Lozzie, you'd all be dead by the time she finishes hugging me. Not that I mind her, of course. Oh shit, look at that, Twill said. I followed her wide-eyed gaze. The great red wall was shuddering. Vast ripples and pulses flowed up the scabby red bricks, more like a twitching biological sphincter than stone and rock under the influence of an earthquake, trying to inch closer to the clean light of the moon in the middle of the sky. A moment later, as if it had taken seconds to cross a vast distance, a sound like slapping meat reached us, distant and distorted, the first sound to break the silence of this mock city. He knows you've almost figured out how to escape, Sevens was saying down the phone, in my own voice. So he's going to do his best to force you down his throat now. How? I croaked into the phone. I haven't figured out anything. The water in the road was lapping at the curb. Dark shapes were moving in it now, giant shadows beneath the surface, as if the water were miles deep rather than an inch or two of muck over dirty asphalt. Oh, don't be stupid, of course you have. You're the only one who can perceive matter in the relevant way. The help I've sent will only be able to signpost you, it's up to you to do the rest, Sevens explained. But it's dead help, a dead friend, a friend who has tasted worms once before. I've never tasted worms, Sevens' voice my voice carried on, and it took me a moment of shock to realize it wasn't really her anymore. My flesh is forever, held between here and there, between decay and life. Are you forever, Heather Morel? You could be, but you are small and weak, you refuse to grow strong, to eat good meat, to grow fat with good food and good dash. Twill flinched at a sudden flicker of dark motion in the front garden of number 12, Barnslow Drive. Jing whirled and growled. Badger tripped back in surprise. But I lowered the phone, and ignored the rattling voice of what was no longer Sevens imitating me. A fox stood on the garden wall. Toned and sleek from a good diet and plenty of exercise, russet fur fluffy and healthy, black-tipped ears swiveling. Bright orange eyes met mine, then the fox quickly looked behind herself, as if she'd recently escaped a hunter and could hear it following on her trail. Then she bounded forward along the wall, and turned back to look at me again. The fox was not part of this place. She was too clean. Too familiar. What the hell? Twill said. It's okay, I said, struggling to gather my thoughts as I ended the call and put my phone away. I think I know this fox. Is it you? Say. You what? Twill boggled at me. The fox tilted her head, quickly looked forward along the road, then back at us again. Filthy water was beginning to overlap the curb beside us, millimeter by millimeter. It's a long story, I said, shaking my head. I think this is Evelyn's well, it's part of her family. Maybe. Sort of. What are you doing here? I asked the fox. How did you get to, oh, well, I suppose we aren't actually in Sherrowford, are we? The fox replied by hurrying along to the next garden wall, hopping the gap with a spring of her back legs. She looked up at the sky and the great red wall closing in on the moon. We didn't have long, the gap was getting smaller and smaller, tightening around that one source of clean natural light. Foxes are good allies, if they will have you, Jing purred. Both predators and eaters of the dead. They know the secret ways. Do we follow her, shaman? She'll do her best to lead us out. I think. If only I could figure out what sevens had meant. Oh bloody great, Badger said. Now we're following an animal. Stay here with the shit water if you want, numbnuts, Twill said. Looks like a chance to me. She was already picking up her feet and trotting after the fox, trying to skirt the rapidly forming puddles on the pavement. Jing settled me more comfortably on her back, and set off as well, at a rapid ground-eating lope. Badger let out a groan, but jogged after us, boots splashing through the muck. The fox raced ahead along the low garden walls, hopping from brick to brick, staying clear of the rising water in the street. We tried to ignore the vast shadows moving below, and the way the great red wall shuddered and flexed above our heads. Pinned in the mouth of a predator, we fled between its teeth. The say fox, if she was indeed the very same preternatural animal we had met skulking around the grounds of Evelyn's childhood home months ago, ran along the garden walls and fences down Barnslow Drive, hopping from corner post to crumbling brick on silent paws, skirting patches of slimy black mold, her russet tail flicking as she stayed out of the rising water in the street below. She led us back out into the city, this false and twisted Sherrowford, as it closed up around us and filled with filth at our feet. We followed as best we could. The fox turned left at the end of Barnslow Drive, but not before stopping and glancing back again. Those lamplight orange eyes found mine as her paws danced in place with restless urgency, her ears swiveling to catch the distant meaty slapping sounds of the great red wall, and the closer slopping noises of the water in the roadway, as dark shapes disturbed the deeps below. Vulpine eyes asked me a silent question, but I didn't speak fox. What? I spluttered out loud over Zheng's shoulder, my voice still a croaking, weakened mess, dragged down by exhaustion, hunger, and pain. The spiking, prickling sensation in my abdomen was a constant presence now. Don't stop. Go. Save your strength, shaman, Zheng purred. But she needs me to. I had no idea what she needed. But the fox was already away again, as if the hounds of hell had her scent. She had to hop down to the pavement, to round the corner to the next set of walls, darting between the slowly forming puddles of rank, stinking water, before leaping up again and leading us onward. My voice was lost in the splash of 3 pairs of feet, as Twill and Zheng and Badger all raced to keep up, plunging around the corner through the rising flood. In the 7 months since I'd met Rain and Evelyn and discovered I was not crazy after all, I had fled or been carried out of more than one nasty situation, looping stairwell traps, fake shopping center fires, defeated cults with collapsing ambitions, actual for real deadly house fires, the library of Carcosa, but with the exception of Wonderland itself, this place took the award for most bowel-clenching terror, because it was very obviously trying to swallow and digest us before we could escape. As we ran after the fox, the great red wall in the impossibly unreachable distance kept up a disgusting shuddering and shaking, undulating like a layer of flesh, or a mucous membrane inching slowly shut. I realized with detached recognition, as I kept my head tight to Zheng's shoulder and my arms firmly clinging to her neck with all the strength I could muster, that perhaps this explained the deep red color of the wall. It was slow-twitch muscle, on a scale my mind refused to comprehend. Whenever I risked a glance upward, I could see the circle of dark sky around the moon was shrinking, as the mouth of this well of flesh tightened around our only source of clean light. I tried not to dwell on what might happen if it closed. The mock city around us was rapidly degenerating now, and filling with what I could only think of as digestive fluid. We raced past houses straight out of an Edgar Allan Poe story, the rotting bones of buildings long abandoned, terraced houses collapsed in on themselves, Victorian red bricks devoured by waves of dark ivy and left open to the elements. The trees had reduced to skeletons too, not the hardy gnarled stereotype of a Gothic horror Uberwald, but brittle grey things flaking apart like burnt logs, coated with parasitic fungi in greasy biofilm. The pavement itself turned crumbly, rent from beneath by cracks as if undermined by tree roots and weeds. Fewer and fewer streetlights shone with any warmth, many of them had shattered bulbs, and the ones that did still function were flickering or dim, leaving us to rely on the narrowing moonlight. Everything was covered in grease, cook-fire grease, fatty grease, soft and yellow where it had built up in the corners of windows and walls, the sort of grease one might find in the gut of a drowned corpse. The filthy water was worse. By the time the Say Fox turned again left a second time, a double back. The vile sewer water had crested the curbs and spread beyond mere pavement puddles. Oily with grime, full of floating black rot and tiny white wiggling worms lifted from the drain entrances and gutters. It stank too, like sulfur, rotten cabbage, and bad eggs. Zheng and Twill and Badger were forced to splash through a thin layer of the rancid water, and the Say Fox spent as little time down on the pavement as possible, darting through as quickly as she could and shaking her paws off once she leapt onto a garden wall again. Twill was in trainers, her feet must have been soaked through when the water inched up above her soles, but at least Zheng and Badger were both wearing proper boots, and I was safe and dry on Zheng's back for now. I was most worried about Badger. He was the only true human here. Neither he nor Twill complained, not that they had time to, with the running and the huffing and the puffing, so at least the water wasn't actually corrosive acid. But there was no telling what it might do to unprotected flesh. Vast dark shapes moved beneath the murky water in the middle of the road, as if we looked down into an actual oceanic gulf. They weren't illusions. Their weight and displacement disturbed the water, forming swells and humps and slopping waves against the curb. As we splashed along the pavement, limbs and feelers began to break the surface out in the road. Grey tentacles like a parody of a giant octopus rose slowly to wave in the air, accompanied by multi-hinged insectoid arms clad in dark exoskeleton, along with strange thin feelers like marine plants and thick muscular tongues like a clam's pseudopod. "Ignore it, Langren," Zheng rumbled. Badger, huffing and puffing and splashing along behind us, was repeating "oh shit, oh shit, oh shit" in every gap between his heaving breath. How am I meant to ignore this? Twill skidded to a halt, throwing up a shower of filthy water, and turned to face the road. One of the insectoid arms had ventured close to the curb, plated like a knight and tipped with a hook to rival any butcher's gutting tool. Zheng slammed to a halt as well, and I clung to her back with muffled squeal, but the arm was already dipping for Twill, darting down to snare her and drag her below the surface of the water. Her ghostly werewolf form whirled together like a second skin. I swallowed a tiny scream as she dodged sideways. The thin stinger missed her, but to catch her balance she put one foot over the edge of the curb, down into the road itself, into the deep water. But Twill didn't go tumbling and splashing into the darkness. Her foot found the asphalt of the road surface, not 1,000 fathoms of cold water. She turned so fast I could barely follow the motion, ripping through the insectoid arm's exoskeleton with both sets of her claws. Black blood erupted from the flailing stump. The severed portion flopped to the ground, falling into a nearby garden. The owner of the arm darted beneath the surface of the water and vanished back into the general murk. "Yeah!" Twill roared. "How'd you like that?" Several other marine appendages which had been circling closer suddenly decided we presented too much difficulty to pick off, and drifted back out into the middle of the road, or slipped beneath the waves. "It's not him," I croaked. "Just parasites. Keep going. Keep moving." The Say Fox had stopped to wait for us almost 20 feet ahead, restless and fidgeting on a garden wall. Her eyes kept darting out into the road too, keeping watch on the circling scavengers below, but then she looked directly at me again. Abyssal instinct stirred at the question behind those fire-lit eyes, but I didn't understand. I looked past the fox, at the route she was taking through the darkening streets, and felt a tugging from the black pit at the bottom of my soul, from the hyperdimensional mathematics always lurking in my subconscious. The eyes' lessons presented some solution to this place, an answer to why it existed. A wave of nausea and vertigo passed through me and I clung to Zhang's back even harder. "Eh? What?" Twill frowned. "Parasites, Langren," Zhang answered for me, already striding past Twill and hurrying after the fox. Urin Jua's tapeworms and lice, picking over the scraps of his meal. "We are beyond them." "Speak for yourself," Badger muttered, voice shaking with terror as he slipped past two, sticking close to Zhang and I. "Watch your feet, Twill," I croaked back, loud as I could. "What? Oh, shit." She only just realized she'd stepped into the road, soaking the cuff of her jeans and filling her trainer with water. She pulled her foot up and shook herself off, then frowned at the visible asphalt beneath the water. "How but it's deep, but what?" "Don't think about it." I called. Impossible space, broken causality, not meant for the unprotected human mind. I could comprehend it, of course, if only I was willing to dredge up the eyes' relevant lessons. "Hurry up, Langren." Zheng roared, taking off after the fox as it scampered away again, leading us deeper into this roiling, rotting Sharrowford. Twill did not need telling twice. She picked up her feet and passed us seconds later, hot on the fox's tail. A minute later, the Say Fox turned left a third time. "The hell?" Twill called out as we rounded the corner. "Is it confused or something?" "We're heading back toward the house." The fox stopped on a low garden wall, waiting for us to catch up, but she offered no explanation. Orange eyes like clean fire burned into mine, pleading now, begging me to see. Twill slowed to a jog as we reached the fox, casting a wary look at the tentacles and pseudopods and tongues which were keeping level with us out in the water. Zhang and I were not far behind, but my mind was spinning, my stomach rebelling at the thoughts darting through my head. "Keep going." Twill shouted encouragement at the fox, even as it was leaping up and racing away down the garden walls and fences, lean vulpine body stretched out in that distinctive loping sprint. "Keep going, we can keep up, we can." "The worm is struggling," Zheng rumbled. She wasn't wrong. Badger was having a hard time keeping up. A few paces behind us, his face was red with effort and coated in sweat. He was heaving for breath, legs pumping, the slowest by far when compared to Zhang and Twill, either of whom could easily have outpaced the fox in a foot race. I can don't leave me," he panted, almost drooling from the strain. "You will not be left behind, worm," Zheng rumbled. "The shaman needs your brain, even if I must rip it out with your spinal column still attached." Badger swallowed hard, and redoubled his efforts. "Shit, I'll carry him." Twill skidded to a halt and doubled back, ready to grab Badger and sling him over her shoulder. "And don't complain, you arse, this is for Heather, not you." "She's not waiting for Badger," I croaked out with considerable effort. Up ahead, the fox halted again, staring back at me, proving my point. Went Twill. "Shaman." Zheng purred. It's waiting for me, I went on, my eyes aching and burning, my skin itching from the aftermath of the screech, my abdomen clenching and spasming inside. I had to pull aside the veil, figure out what hyperdimensional principle I was meant to apply. I was too exhausted and spent to risk getting it wrong. I would only have one shot. Running doesn't matter, running won't get us out. It needs me to, my stomach roiled. Out in the road, the water roiled too, slopping as the parasite predators sensed weakness. Twill, keep moving. I snapped. We have to keep going, I can't think. Twill nodded and turned around, after the fox again. Badger did his best to keep up. Focus, shaman, Zheng whispered. Trying, I croaked. Miss Fox turned left again. We followed, past rotten trees and collapsed houses, and I realized we'd entered the far end of Barnslow Drive. The insulting parody of home rose into view once more, covered in soot and grease, ruined and empty. The rising water was flooding the front garden now, sluicing through the gate and soaking into the soil, turning the overgrown grass into a reeking, fecal swamp. It's taken us in a bloody circle. Twill shouted. The fox didn't slow down, sprinting at top speed along the garden walls. Can't you, Badger panted. Talk to it. You're a canine too. Twill answered with an insulted snap of her teeth. The say fox slammed to a halt at number 12, Barnslow Drive, skipping and hopping across the brickwork of the wall and then doubling back, pacing as if in a cage, as she waited the few seconds for us to catch up. Twill looked like she wanted to pick up the animal and throttle her. What now? She asked the fox. We're back where we bloody well started. No we're not, I croaked, then had to pause and wince and gasp as a fresh spike of pain raked through my abdomen. I pressed myself tight to the warmth of Zheng's back. It only looks that way. The fox stopped pacing and locked eyes with me again. Then she looked at the house, the garden, and out at the road with the marine parasites and the slopping water, now up to our ankles on the pavement. I followed her gaze, over the disgusting details of this hostile parody. Then up at the great red wall, shuddering and flexing. The moon was now separated from the mouth of the wall by only a thin margin of sky. Moonlight cast a clean silver circle on us, but only us. All else was plunged into the shadow beneath the ring wall. Talk, shaman, Zheng whispered. Running didn't matter, I squeezed out, my mind beginning to detach. Running was just ritual. Oh, Badger panted. Great. Right. Yeah. Some ritual. This isn't the same spot, I went on. Because this isn't space, not really. We have to reach the wall, but we can't because we're not oriented correctly, because a tongue keeps food pushed back. Aw, don't say it like that. Twill whined. And she's trying to get me to rotate us? As I voiced the idea, the logic fell into place with a searing lance of familiar old headache pain. I drew a sharp wince between my teeth as the true meaning and structure of this place was outlined in hyperdimensional mathematics, too hot to touch, the abyssal truth beneath the human sense data. We stood in the mouth of a whale, risen from the abyssal depths, hanging open in our reality. Crusted with barnacles and filled with parasites, all the life of a miniature ecosystem that grew in the centuries between gargantuan swallows. And now it was about to hinge shut and vanish back below the waves, with us inside. It all seemed so unfair, so absurd, so without meaning or purpose. This ancient mage, Uren-ju, the big man, we hadn't even been aware of him 3 hours ago. For all we knew, he hadn't been aware of us either, totally uninterested in anything except collecting his due from Badger. But this was the inevitable result of being involved in this world of magecraft and secret monsters, of brushing up against outside, wasn't it? I'd never truly agreed with Evelyn's paranoia. I'd proved it wrong enough times, proved that the people we encountered were in the end just people, even some of those who weren't human, and that we could deal with them as people, not cognitive hazards or insane berserkers or unreachable mysteries to be killed and burned. But here was the truth and justification. We'd simply bumped into this thing, going about its own grisly, incomprehensible business, absolutely lethal and totally beyond our ability to counter. A mage, more dangerous than any god. In the end it was just another threat to my pack, and another obstacle on the path back to my sister. There was only one thing for it. I was running on fumes, but we had to get out. It didn't matter if I fell unconscious or vomited up my entire digestive system the second we were out, as long as we got out. With a scream and a shudder and a stab of white-hot pain inside my head, I drew the relevant equation from the dark rooms in my subconscious, gripped the dripping levers of reality, and pulled. Zheng leaned forward so I could vomit over her shoulder without getting it all down her front. Very considerate. Long hard heartbeats passed as my vision throbbed dark and my nose bled all over Zheng's jumper. Muffled voices shouted in panic, "Twill. Badger." And then the world came trickling back to my senses, my ears clearing with conscious effort as I wiped my mouth on Zheng's shoulder and lifted my head. "We're still here." Twill shouted up at me. "What did you do?" "We're still here." She was ankle deep in the filthy water. The ruined version of our home still haunted my peripheral vision. I was so weak I couldn't even nod past her. "Look, Langren," Zheng breathed. Badger was already staring, breathless and wide-eyed. When Twill turned and saw, she ducked her head and cowered. The great red wall now stood a mere 20 feet away. I had brought us here, we had traveled without moving. The wall looked as if it had erupted from the ground in the manner of a giant tooth from dying gum tissue, displacing pavement and asphalt and overgrown grass, blocking off the road and bisecting one corner of the house. The vast length stretched off to the left and right either side of us. Up close the surface of the wall was gnarled and pitted, covered in bumps and ridges like the inside of a diseased throat. Each red block was so large that we could only spot one seam, 60 or 70 feet up in the air. Water slapped against the base of the wall, but the parasites in the deep were retreating in haste. Their questing limbs slipped beneath the surface as they fled down the road and away from the edge of their world. The Say Fox opened her russet muzzle and let out a laughing chitter-chatter vulpine yip-yap. "Yes, shaman!" Zheng roared in triumph. "You have brought us here, now we break through. No wall will keep me in." What happened to "Don't touch the wall"? Twill boggled at the vast edifice, then at Zheng. "Evie said don't touch it, right? And that part was really her." "Wizards are often wrong," Zheng purred. "Shaman, I must set you down if I am to rend this giant's flesh." "No," I whined as Zheng began to crouch. "Zheng, no. I have to do it." Zheng paused. "Don't touch it," I said, sniffing back my nosebleed. "Can't touch it. Evie was right, don't touch. You'd get infected. Have to use brain math. Punch a hole, with math. Not fists." Twill and Zheng shared a glance. Badger swallowed so loud I could hear it over the slopping water. "She's nearly spent," Twill said through gritted teeth. "The shaman knows well enough," Zheng purred. "She'll pass out," Twill went on. "She'll pass out, she's gone. Look at her." "I get one shot," I croaked. "I know. One shot. I can do." But the end of my sentence was drowned out by an earth-shattering schloop-pop as the great red wall shuddered again, a vast ripple of slow motion passing up through the muscle in a wave of contraction. We all followed the motion upward, to the opening far above our heads. Like a puckered sphincter squeezing shut, the circular opening of the great red wall closed in on itself, and blotted out the moon. We were plunged into rancid darkness, left with only the weak orange light from stuttering street lamps. The Say Fox went frantic, hopping and bouncing from paw to paw. Twill bristled all over and muttered curses under her breath. The water in the road started to slop and slosh, as if disturbed far below. "It's okay," I croaked. "I can still do it." "Shut up, worm," Zheng growled. Let the shaman concentrate. Badger bit his own knuckles, tears running down his cheeks. Urinju is preparing to swallow, Zheng said. Work fast, shaman. I didn't waste breath on reassurances. I concentrated. If we were in the mouth of a true whale, then no amount of bone and hide could have resisted the atomic fire I knew my mind could put out, no cartilage and tendon would stand up to pure force. But this was not mere flesh I was preparing to punch through, it was self-expression, a construct of abyssal truth and genius, creativity and human cruelty, which had taken centuries to grow in the mind and body of a mage so far beyond me that they almost rivaled the eye in sheer power. But I was an abyssal thing too, and I already understood what I was looking at. With a hiss of pain I laid out the beginning equations of comprehension and definition, the framework that would allow me to define what lay in front of me. Once I had that ready, pulling the cell walls apart would not be too difficult in theory, though it would take everything I had. I would pass out in a welter of my own vomit and blood once I was done. But we would be out, and the others could take it from there. I trusted Zheng to carry me home through anything. I moved my mind to slot the first figure of the equation into place. But then the front door of the dark mockery of number 12, Barnslow Drive, flew open, shearing off rusted hinges and slapping down into the water in the overgrown garden. The door frame bulged and cracked, then exploded outward in chunks of brick and a shower of wood splinters. 10 feet of obese worm-eaten pale meat strode out of the house and straight toward us. Urinju, the big man, Mr. Blobby, he'd figured out what I was doing. He'd rotated himself down to our level to stop me. Badger screamed. Twill turned and growled through too many teeth, hunched and ready to pounce. The Say Fox froze in place, ears back, tail bristling. Zheng backed up into the deeper water with me still clinging to her back, but I was insensible with sudden explosive pain in my head and a streaming nosebleed, as the equation fell apart in pure shock. How could we be in his mouth, yet fight him like this at the same time? I sensed that the answer to that question would drive me irrevocably insane. It is after the shaman. Zheng roared over her. But that was all she had time to say. Urinju moved fast and sure for such an impossibly fat figure, slapping down those slab feet and kicking up huge sprays of filth, rather than troubling himself with water resistance by striding through the muck. Headless and towering, both hands held out in front like a cheap zombie, each palm split by a curled red grin filled with dripping saliva and sharp teeth. It bore down on us at full speed, like a man power walking, taking the garden wall in one stride, coming straight for Zheng and I. It was like being charged by a hippopotamus. Even with no energy left, my body instinctively tried to recoil, to make myself small, curl up to protect my vital organs. My phantom limbs joined in, trying to make a ball like a threatened octopus, around both myself and Zheng. Twill, oh Twill, so full of stupid bravery, launched herself at the big man's side, all teeth and claw at an angle impossible for him to dodge without breaking his stride. But he simply stepped onward and she sailed through the open air behind to crash down into the water, spluttering and confused. She should have hit him, the angle was impossible for her to miss, but he'd simply not been there. Zheng feinted one way, then darted the other. I hiccuped into her shoulder and clung on for dear life as she moved fast enough to wrench my guts out of place. For a split second, I saw Urinju in two places at once. The headless giant was bearing down on us from his former angle, but also at the same time intercepting Zheng from another direction. Abyssal senses or pure luck, I had no idea how I saw that, but the trick made my head ache and my eyes sting. Then he was very much in front of us. Zheng slammed to a halt as he reached out one plate-sized hand to rip me away from her. "Hey, you," came an angry, shaking voice. It was Badger. He'd walked right up to the big man's side, holding his head high, eyes raised, gripping his wounded hand tight in his other. Fresh blood dripped between his knuckles. The big man stopped, as if bothered by a fly. If he had possessed a neck and head, it would have turned slowly to regard the tiny human form of Badger. Zheng took the opportunity to back up, splashing through the water as I wheezed and spat bile and tried to gather myself enough to try again. "Shaman, we cannot run," she hissed quickly. "There is nowhere to go. Get us out." "Try," I gurgled. Had to restart the equation, but I had nothing left. Not even fumes. I would have to dip into the abyss. Trying, too. In a display of some of the most idiotic courage I had ever seen in a human being, Badger quickly opened his wounded hand and raised it high, to strike the big man's side or leg. In that frozen moment, I saw the disgusting mouth had reopened in Badger's palm and the blood, his own blood, in his own teeth in his real mouth, and realized what he had done. Weaponless and helpless, Badger had bitten open his own wound and summoned the mouth hand again, to turn Uranjua's teeth against itself. Badger slapped his palm down onto the big man's tree-trunk thigh. The mouth bit deep into wormy, greasy flesh, and came away spitting out pale off-white fluid more akin to pus than blood. The big man shook Badger off like a puppy clinging to his trouser leg, and used the back of one his massive hands to move Badger out of way, forcing him to stumble and trip through the water. It wasn't even a violent gesture. It was the act of an uncaring adult toward a small and stupid child. And he could have simply avoided the whole thing. We were all familiar by now with how he could step past any physical attack. He had chosen to get bitten, to show how little our weapons mattered. All Badger's courage drained away into nothing. He went white with horror as the big man turned back to Zheng and I. Twill went for him again, but she just skidded into the empty water where he should have been standing, growling and snapping and shouting in frustration. Over on the wall, the Say Fox was yipping and yowling, doing what little she could. And then he was on me. I saw it again, Uranju at every possible angle all around Zheng and I, a dozen mouth hands all reaching to pluck me off her back, to bite my soul out. Every escape was accounted for. Zheng chose the unseen option. In a flash of motion she let go of my thighs, pulled my arms from around her neck, and turned fast enough to fling me off her back. She shook me off and threw me clear. I screamed in surprise, phantom limbs frantically trying to anchor myself to her, like a squid shooting out feeding tentacles to hook prey, but my tentacles were not real, not right now. I landed with a splash in the filthy water 6 feet away, the impact knocking the wind out of me, soaked and freezing in an instant. "Shaman, get out!" Zheng roared, and turned to face the momentarily confused big man. She'd bought me a few seconds. Zheng struck like lightning wrapped in molten honey. Her fists moved as pounding pistons, aiming a dozen punches in the blink of an eye at the vulnerable bones of the big man's sternum and upper ribs. A single one of those blows could shatter concrete and bend steel. I'd seen it before, and I had no doubt that even the big man's substantial physical form would be hard-pressed to withstand that. Zheng's fists passed through empty air, as if the headless giant was just to one side of her reach, trapped by an optical illusion of perspective. Uranju reached out to bite her. One drooling mouth in a fat-fingered hand moved toward Zheng's face, slow and easy, like he was going to pet a cat, with no need to exert himself. Zheng stood her ground, because if she dodged, the big man would go for me instead. I was lurching to my feet, a horrified scream in my throat, my face smeared with nosebleed, barely able to stand on quivering knees and weighed down by my soaking clothes. But to my incredible surprise, Zheng caught the flabby pale meat of the giant's wrist with both her hands, bracing her feet and digging her fingers into the greasy skin. A savage grin of bloodlust joy ripped across her face, showing all her teeth as she held the snapping mouth at bay inches from her own. "Shaman," she roared. "I can't," I panted in horror. I had nothing left. My vision was throbbing black at the edges. Then Uranju slapped his other palm onto Zheng's side, and bit deep. She didn't scream, barely grunted. Razor-sharp teeth pieced her flank just beneath her ribcage, ripping straight through her clothes and tearing off a huge chunk of quivering, bleeding flesh. The hand pulled back, swallowing and then darting out a thick red tongue to lick the blood from those smiling lips. Zheng sagged all along one side as blood streamed down her hip and thigh, soaking into her trousers and streaming into the water. She stumbled as if the strength had gone out of her, and lost her grip on Uranjua's wrist as he pulled his hand away. He moved to bite her a second time. She got an arm in front of her face as she staggered backward, and he ripped a chunk of raw meat out of Zheng's forearm. That time, she screamed. An angry roar of frustration and pain, open-mouthed like a lion. I cannot adequately describe the horror of watching somebody you love being hurt in that way. Not just shot or stabbed. No wound could kill Zheng. She'd shrugged off far worse, and she'd reveled in the damage. She'd leapt from a building for me, back when we'd barely known each other. But Uranjua's bites were far more than mere wounds. They were an infection, a violation, a claim. Like watching a loved one step on a rusty nail, or drowning in sewage, or taking a poison arrow to the gut. Zheng sagged backward, one leg going out from under her. She splashed down in the filthy water, barely managing to stay upright, balanced on one knee. Her blood flowed in twin rivers from the pair of massive bite wounds. The headless giant reached down toward her with both hands. A hiss rose in my throat, a counterclaim, because Zheng was mine and nobody hurts any of my pack mates and she was mine, my claim, don't you touch her, but I was spent. Empty. I didn't even have the energy to wheeze a challenge, let alone transmute my throat again and screech defiance. I could barely stay on my feet, my legs were quivering with the effort. In my blurring vision I saw Twill drop into a crouch behind the big man, ready to pounce, but that was a hopeless gesture. I could not get us out, my brain was too full of fog, I was ready to collapse, and Uranjua would murder my friends and my lovers, eat my pack, and then turn to me regardless. I lacked the energy. But I did not lack the means to produce it. By the split second that idea shot through my exhausted mind, it was already too late to stop myself. I was already reaching down into the black tar pooled at the base of my soul, to flick a single mathematical value from a 0 to a 1. It was a minor miracle I didn't kill myself by accident. I had studied nothing, made no plans, had no idea how this even worked, but there was no time for experimenting. Everything was screaming at me to help Zheng, to fight off her attacker, to get us out, to protect. And if I had been thinking clearly, if I had been wide awake, I would have made the exact same decision. Consequences did not matter. With one change in the hyperdimensional equation that defined myself, I spun imagination, phantom pain and abyssal memory together, into pneumosomatic reality. I forged new flesh and simulated muscle and artificial tendon, tied into a knot so complex that evolution itself could never have woven something so beautiful. I built the trilobe reactor organ in my abdomen, with pneumosomatic flesh, made it real and lit it with a spark of metabolic fire. Heat, real heat, body heat running hot, flushed up my side and through my gut and pumped strength into my legs like a shot of adrenaline. My heart rate climbed to maximum and stayed there, sustained and supported by processes that would have killed an unaltered human being. My head cleared with a single shake, senses so wide that they hurt, and I gasped as my lungs filled and every inch of my skin broke out with sweat. Glucose pounding through my veins, every muscle overproducing ATP, and the hungry void at my core filling up like an empty fuel tank for which I'd finally found the input nozzle. The trilobe organ inside me was not a mere physical reactor. Other processes were already running away, approximations of chemistry and biology that should only have been possible down in the abyss. The rest came a split second later, as naturally as taking a breath my tentacles sprouted from my sides, 6 rainbow-strobing pneumosomatic limbs lashing the air, ready for war, reinforced with ropes of muscle, tipped with razor-sharp claws, and lined with hundreds of tiny hooks. But the pneumosomatic changes did not stop there. I was too deep now. I blinked nictitating membranes over my eyes, the surface of my skin flushed with tetrodotoxin and warning coloration, my shoulders sprouted defensive spines like a sea urchin, my teeth ached and elongated and sharpened, webbing formed between my fingers, thick and leathery, a tail tipped by a venom-packed stinger grew from the base of my spine. My throat twisted into an impossible configuration and my jaw hinged open in a screech of challenge. All pneumosomatic modifications, none planned, all drawing power from my new reactor, a furnace wedged deep in the left side of my abdomen. I suspected I would never be able to sleep on my left side again. Never sleep again, full stop. I had more energy than I could ever use, drawn from a source that would never run dry, and I had completed the first stage of true alchemical transition, the great work. I was perfect. And I had no idea if I could ever go back. Didn't matter right then. The whole process had taken the blink of an eye, and Uren-ju was still reaching down toward Zhang's face with his drooling mouth hands, but he had paused. Despite the lack of a head or face, I had the distinct impression he was looking at me. Holy shit, Twill breathed. Heather. Badger was staring at me too, mouth open in awe. The Sei Fox had gone quiet and still, ready to flee. Shaman, Jin grunted, voice bubbling with blood and pain. Do not. I was barely even there. Words registered, but I didn't care about the meaning of the hooting ape sounds. Those were for later. With a screech and a hiss and a warning display of tentacles to put a colossal squid to shame, I lashed out at the big man. But of course he simply wasn't where my tentacles struck the air. He was to one side, as if I was mistaken and had missed. Whatever I had just become, I was still physical and pneumosomatic, I couldn't just reach out with my tentacles and stop him. But I'd thought of that. Or at least, abyssal instinct and ape brain and whatever Heather they had constructed between them, had thought of that. In the illusory split second where the big man was not where he should be, I plunged my mind back into the eye's lessons, screeching at the pain in my head, and threw a cage around him. A cage of mathematical redefinition, a cage of here and now. Through effort that would have knocked me unconscious without the reactor thrumming and throbbing in my belly, I defined this part of him, this projection, this slice of his true form, and forced it to stay on our level. Like a giant squid hooking a shark and dragging it down into the black ocean depths. The equation was still not gentle or easy on my body and mind, no matter how changed or how much I'd added to myself. Lances of pain ran through my skull like molten hot railway spikes, and my stomach clenched into a ball as I spat up bile. My nosebleed restarted and I smeared the mess across my face, gagging and panting and whining with pain. But I didn't pass out. I couldn't have passed out if I'd wanted to. Uren-ju was suddenly in only one place. Straightening up, turning toward me. Even if the full, real entity could not be fought, this slice of him could bleed and die. 6 or 7 or 8 dimensions. I screeched and spat, my voice a trilling abyssal mess of knotted muscle. Fight in this one or let us go. Take it back. Take back the bites. She's not yours. The headless giant raised both hands toward me, split by leering grins, licking their lips in mocking obscenity. So I screeched, cast my tentacles wide, and threw myself at this rival predator. Ankle-deep in filthy water, besieged by cloying greasy darkness, trapped in a rotting mockery of Sherrowford that was about to swallow us alive, with Jing bleeding from bites the size of my hands and wounded in a way even she could not shrug off, I had taken the only option left. I screeched and leapt at Uren-ju, with no idea what I was doing. I slammed into the headless giant as a flailing mass of barbed tentacles, toxic spines, and snapping teeth, no more coordinated than a little girl in a playground slap fight. But this little girl was armed with all the fruits of the abyss. Uren-ju stood his ground before my inexpert charge. Why not? He probably weighed 10 times what I did. A plate-sized hand smacked away one of my tentacles with wrecking ball force, bruising and tenderizing the rainbow-strobing flesh. But there was no bone inside the tentacle to break, only springy pneumosomatic muscle. No shock, no transmitted impact, and no way to stop me. He didn't have enough hands. My 5 other tentacles hit him all over like a squid fighting a whale, lashing at his soft, wormy, rotten-out flesh, digging in with thousands of hooks and barbs. Tiny muscles in my tentacles all twisted in a wave, rotating each hook to tear every wound wider, before whipping back, ripping great tracks out of his hide. He bled slow sickly off-white pus from hundreds of lacerations, the broken flesh covered in necrotizing mucus I'd left behind. Uren-ju struck back, trying to catch the strobing rainbow beauty in the teeth of his hand-mouths as I lashed at him a second time. He did, twice, biting chunks of quivering, bleeding pneumosomatic flesh from my tentacles. I screeched and yowled, but the trilobe reactor organ was already compensating, flooding my veins with new kinds of white blood cells and things that were not really mammalian leukocytes at all, flushing the inflamed skin around the bites with eosinophils and lymphocytes that had no proper place in a human body, fighting off the big man's claim. My wounds closed with rapid growth scabs of pastel fluorescence, each tentacle blossomed with chitin plates for armor. The big man's hand-mouths retched out gobbets of my flesh, their lips swollen, gagging on mouthfuls of tetrodotoxin and conotoxin and approximations of compounds that should not have been possible in our reality. He compensated too. Ignored the third strike from my whipping tentacles, and reached for my head and mantle instead. Head and body instead, insisted a still ape part of my mind. Even in a life-or-death fight, running on pure instinct, I knew that to let him bite my core of true flesh would be too much for me to combat. Pneumosomatic matter was renewable, plastic, malleable, but a bite from one of those mouths could rip out my entire flank, snip off 3 of my tentacles in one chomp, and snap my spine with ease. He bore down on me, taking giant crashing steps through the filthy water which was now up to my calves, spraying the rank sewage everywhere as he tried to grab me in a bear hug. Animal fear flashed sirens in the back of my head at his sheer size and weight, this towering mountain of pale meat about to crash into me. I hissed in warning and panic, trying to scramble back. Without the clean moonlight, our fight took place by the disorienting flicker and dying glow of the street lights, casting the big man's bulk in roiling shadows, confusing human eyesight. Pneumosomatic additions rewired my eyeballs and optic nerve, racing for an advantage as my sight flickered through infrared and ultraviolet and other color spectra which we have no vocabulary to describe. Abyssal memory provided theory, pneumosomatic flesh executed praxis, new ligament strong as steel cables sprouted along my ankle tendons, articulated exoskeleton wrapped my knees in springy cages, and the surface of my skin rose in warning spines of red and yellow. My new legs bounced and I dodged below his grasp, stepping sideways to circle him, hitting his arm and flank with my tentacles again, ripping off great strips of his flesh even as his mouth hands caught the spines along my shoulders and snapped them off. But I was too ungainly to make full use of what I was. Too new. Too unfamiliar. I couldn't stay steady on my new legs, overcompensating for the muscle difference and the fluid resistance in the rising flood. As I tried to dodge I tripped, sprawled, and splashed down into the road. Water closed over my face. Membrane slid across my eyes to protect them from the slopping, roiling filth. Valves slammed shut in my nose and throat to keep out infection as I surfaced and spluttered, spitting out the taste of sewage. Uren-ju turned and stomped and reached toward me. I attempted to right myself with organs I didn't yet possess, siphon jets and internal gyroscopes and gas bladders, organs too complex to grow from idea seeds in the time it took the headless giant to reach me. I hissed and spat and screeched and sprouted new spines and armor plates, but he grabbed me and bit through them even as I wrapped tentacles tight around his wrists to hold him back. The rotten pudding flesh on his arms and torso was blackening around the thousands of tiny wounds I'd inflicted, but still his monstrous strength pressed me down. Even pumped full of paralytic toxin, he was 100 times stronger than I. The water around us was bucking and chopping, and the great red wall was convulsing, drawing tighter and tighter. Uren-ju, the greater entity of which this obese headless giant was only a projection, was still in the process of swallowing. He was only fighting to keep us occupied. My reactor was running hotter and hotter as I squirmed to my feet, locked in a death grip with the big man, caked in sweat, heart pounding like a piston. The trilobe organ raced through and discarded entire new classes of reaction, as my body demanded more with each new pneumosomatic germination, each addition wove at speed, each physical reinforcement and enhancement. The big man forced one hand against my faltering strength, right toward my unprotected face. "Stop fighting him, shaman!" Jing roared from somewhere nearby. "Stop fighting and get rid of him!" A ball of teeth and claw and grey russet fur shot out of the gathering dark and slammed into Uranjua's legs from behind, scything for his hamstrings and the backs of his knees. Snapping teeth closed on the classic canine crippling targets. He let go of me and hit Twill with an almighty backhand, sending her flying. She crashed into the garden wall of number 12, Barnslow Drive, but hopped to her feet again in a split second, spitting blood and grinning through a wolf's snout. Behind her, Badger had picked up the Say Fox, cradling the animal in his arms like a pet, to shield her from the rising water, even as he cringed at the reopened wound in his hand, squeezing it tight to stop the blood flow. She was screaming at the big man too, those long open-mouthed fox screams of warning and panic, as the water rose and the whale's mouth pressed in all around us. Jing couldn't even get to her feet. She was sagging, still bleeding, her side coated in her own blood. "Get rid of him, shaman." "I'm trying," I thought, "I'm trying, but I'm not strong enough, even when I'm perfect and beautiful and I could be such an idiot sometimes." That's the downside of entering a fight without any training. You get tunnel vision. As Twill picked up her paws and charged the big man again, I lashed out at the exposed flesh of his back with all 6 tentacles, and connected in a great slapping rip of rending flesh. Then I dredged up that familiar old equation. This headless giant was only one part of the entity, a projection into our 3 dimensions of something so much greater and more alien, a human who had journeyed into the abyss and returned as something more like me. Unlike me, he had pursued a transformation that had left his body and humanity behind, transcended the mere physical, become so other that he was truly untouchable to us. Also unlike me, he couldn't do hyperdimensional mathematics. Best I could achieve was to send this part of him outside, but it would be like sending a person's arm or hand outside, without the rest of him. The impact would rip him apart on the dimensional membrane itself, like throwing a person against an electric wood saw. Bleeding and quivering with white-hot fire across the surface of my consciousness, I raced through the equation, and put into practice lessons from an adoptive parent far more dangerous than this predator. Out. But to my incredible surprise, Uranju fought back. He was clumsy and blunt, the struggling of a crab turning the curve of its shell against a cephalopod's crushing beak. He did not know brain math, but he had once visited those impossible depths of mathematical principle and starlight and dancing photons. He understood just enough to turn away my beak for a fraction of a second. That fraction of a second was all he needed. As the equation snapped shut, he took one giant, striding step forward to leave my tentacles behind, ripping wormy flesh off his back. He batted Twill away again so she crashed into the roiling water. Then he turned and backed away from me, palms out and grinning wide with their wet, red mouths. He only had to wait, stall a few more seconds, until his vast whale mouth was ready to swallow. Unconsciously, on the level of autonomic reaction, below true flesh and pneumosomatic addition alike, down in my soul, I prepared to dive. If he was going to drag us down into the abyss, I would be ready to swim. I would eat him from the inside. Perhaps he retained enough human intellect to read the change in my expression, or perhaps some other less physical sense allowed him to understand what I was about to do, the lengths to which I would go. Perhaps in that moment he realized that I was like him, I had been in the abyss too, and I would not die on the first swallow. My friends would die, but I would linger in his gut, chew through his intestines, sear his innards with acid, and worm my way to his heart like a killing parasite. I made myself indigestible. And he let go. The greasy headless giant stopped moving, frozen on the spot. The life seemed to go out of it for a split second before the entire thing collapsed into jelly, melting down in a mass of yellow-white pus and liquefied flesh. Uranju could not rotate this part of himself out of the dimensions accessible to us. I had him pinned here with a cage of hyperdimensional mathematics, so he was forced to gnaw the limb off like an animal in a trap. He abandoned this part, this projection, the fight lost to the threat of real damage in the abyss if he dared swallow me. Clean silver light crashed down into the dark. Above our heads, the great red wall opened, puckered around the full moon and rapidly widening, pulling away and down toward us, sinking into the ground only 20 feet away where it bisected the road. The water began to drain as well, slopping and sloshing down hidden sluices as Uranjua's jaws receded back into the abyss, without us. Holy shit, Twill breathed, staring up at the wall, before she splashed through the draining water toward the huge mound of rotten white goo. Where'd he go? What's happening? Heather. Spitting us out, I croaked a scratchy, twisted sound from an inhuman throat. You're sure? She stared at me, eyes roving nervously along my body, my tentacles, my spines, my toxic coloration. Here, she could see it all, and I looked barely human. I grunted. Badger was staring up as well, still hugging the fox. Never thought I'd be so glad to be regurgitated, he said. The fog rushed back in, flowing over the lip of the great red wall as it descended, plunging us into thick soupy mist as the last of the filthy water drained away from the road surface. For a moment the fog was so thick I couldn't see any of the others, only the disgusting greasy mound of white mess that had been Uranju. Zijing? I called out. Here, shaman. She was right by my shoulder in the fog, bent over with pain, heaving ragged breaths between her teeth, blood caked all down her hip and one leg of her jeans and dripping from the bite wound in her forearm. She put her other hand on my shoulder, and I realized with stomach-lurching horror that she was using me to stay standing. The fog thinned but didn't clear normal fog, not greasy and thick, the ordinary weather of spring fog in Sherrowford, and revealed everybody else still standing. Twill gaped around us, wide-eyed and panting and dripping wet, same as myself. Badger closed his eyes, shaking with relief. The Say Fox wriggled out of his arms and trotted over to me. We were next to the bus stop where we'd caught up with Badger. Right where we'd first plunged into the beast's maw. Relief was sweet, but I didn't have the luxury of collapsing or passing out. My bioreactor was still burning hot, still fueling pneumosomatic flesh. Are we? Twill panted. Are we out? We won. I was too busy gaping at Zheng's wounds to answer. Shaman, Zheng said, her throat thick with blood and pain. Zheng wasn't meant to be in pain, not real pain, she wasn't meant to feel this way, she was meant to shrug it off, to leap and howl and laugh. Shaman, you must get home. Uranju is still waiting for us. Go. She shoved me away and I stumbled a few steps as she crashed down to one knee again, heaving for breath, drooling blood. Zheng, no. I said, and rushed back, falling to my knees by her side. He shook his head. I'm not going anywhere without you lot. Shaman, go, Zheng grunted. Her eyes were heavy and unfocused. I ignored her plea and wormed underneath her arm, got close to her side, then pulled up the shredded fabric of her jumper to expose the wound in her flank. I gasped and had to blink back tears, a hand to my mouth. Her wound looked very, very bad. The flesh was chewed and mashed, hanging in strips and dangling shreds. Gray and black patches were already blooming with necrotic infection on fast forward, leeching Zheng's strength with a claim beyond mere biological damage. I grabbed her forearm too. The second bite there was much the same, ruining her on a level deeper than the physical. Had I could still see and feel my tentacles, my toxic coloration, my webbing and my spines, all the miracle of what I really was, Homo abyssus in the flesh. But we were back in our reality now, and my additions were confined to pneumosomatic invisibility once more. I cannot be saved, Shaman, Zheng croaked. Uranju has me. Go, before. I bared my teeth and hissed, to shut her up and establish who gave the orders here, enough to make Twill jump and Badger flinch and the Say Fox hop back. I hissed in defiance of anything and anyone that would attempt to take what was mine. I was willing to violate reality itself to rescue my sister from the eye, and I was not about to allow some jumped-up mage who'd spent too long in the abyss to take away any other members of my family. Abyssal instinct provided the methods. I opened my mouth wide, shoved my face right into the wound in Zheng's side, and started biting. She grunted in sudden, surprised pain. Shaman. Holy shit, what is she? Somebody vomited. I think that was Badger. I bit away the infected flesh around and inside Zheng's wound, shearing it off with the clean razor-sharp edges of pneumosomatic teeth that only she and I could see. I nuzzled in deep, didn't care about her blood smeared all over my face, gripping Zheng with all my tentacles to keep her in place, barbs safely retracted. I drooled great looping ropes of pneumosomatic antiseptic mucus into the wound as I worked, forming new glands in my throat for the task, sharing white blood cells with Zheng's immune system, even as scraps of her actual blood slid down my throat to be sampled and repurposed by the trilobe reactor organ in my gut. I spat out chunks of gray and black infection to sizzle on the asphalt road surface, melted by bootstrapped enzymes in my saliva. The physical act of biting away her infection was more than mere biology. Whatever I was doing, I did not understand it on a conscious level, but I knew in my gut that it had a spiritual mirror. I dug out the big man's claim on her, made her safe, made her mine, cleaned away any trace of him with my own abyssal biology. By the time I finished on the first wound, Zheng didn't need to be held still anymore. She offered her arm for me to do the same to the second bite, breathing clearer and easier, staring at me with wonder. All right, Twill was saying, her werewolf transformation dismissed to leave a wet and bedraggled teenage girl standing there. All right, this takes the award for weirdest shit I've ever seen. She can do it, Badger whispered. She can. Eventually I was done, and stood up, wobbling on my knees despite the sheer power of the bioreactor in my abdomen. Even backed up by near-infinite energy, cleansing the big man's infection was taking a toll. My immune system or whatever abyssal processes were analogous to an immune system were working overtime, producing white blood cells and flushing me out, detoxifying the infection. Shaman, Zheng breathed in awe, and got to her feet. She was shaking too, weak from the effort, but much stronger than before, no longer being actively drained. She caught me under one arm before I stumbled. I wrapped a tentacle around her in return. You are a beautiful thing, Shaman. I grunted. My pneumosomatic mucus had formed a sticky layer over her raw flesh, stopped the bleeding, and was encouraging and supporting her own rapid healing processes. I stared at it, unwilling to split my attention until I was certain the wounds were beginning to knit closed, however slowly. Shaman, we must go. This is not over. Bloody right, Twill agreed, bouncing on the balls of her feet. You okay now, Zheng? Not yet. I will be. I nodded along. The Say Fox rubbed herself against my ankles. Home, I muttered. My pneumosomatic additions were blurring against the fog and the backdrop of real terraced houses, in a trick of the light. They didn't start falling apart into ash and nothingness, I wasn't running out of energy. As the last of the big man's infection was cleansed away, the trilobe reactor did not ratchet down, did not cease production. If anything, I was getting hotter inside as my reserves filled to the brim. You better not run, Twill growled at Badger. Not a chance, Badger replied. He'd wrapped his bleeding hand in his sleeve again. His eyes wandered over to where the great greasy mound of liquid flesh still lay in the middle of the road, the remains of the big man's physical form. Twill noticed it too. Gross. It's dead, right? Looks like a fatberg. What do we do with it? Leave it here, Zheng purred. Let the monkeys hose it into the drains. Now move, the shaman is burning up. We staggered back through quiet midnight streets, comforted by the normality of good old English fog, and the sounds of the occasional car passing along distant roads. The Say Fox trotted ahead of us as if she knew the way, nosing at the overflowing rubbish bins and sniffing the walls, just like an ordinary fox, but with far more self-assurance than any natural vulpine visitor. Zheng supported me with one arm, but she couldn't have picked me up even if I'd needed it. Unlike Badger and Twill, she could still see the truth of Homo abyssus, my 6 rainbow strobing tentacles, the snapped spines on my shoulders, the chitin plates on my legs and sides, the strange shape of my pupils and the toxic coloration in my skin. Carrying me with all that might have presented some difficulty. She was careful to avoid my various spikes and sharp edges. "Concentrate, shaman," she purred. "Do not leave me." I blinked up at her, blinked 4 different sets of eyelids, and tried to deny that I knew what she meant. "Zheng. Of course I won't. I won't, I'm fine." I tried to soften my pointy bits, to round them off, to retract my spines and remetabolize the toxins, to fold away the slashing claws studding my tentacles, but as we crept toward home, my sense of my own body grew harder to hold on to, the plastic metamorphic process running away with abyssal memory and euphoric longing. My tentacles grew blurry, hazy and indistinct, with both hooked and non-hooked configurations laid on top of each other, occupying the same space. I blinked, and the tentacles appeared to be doubled, tripled, quadrupled. I was coated with sweat, my belly burned with fire like I'd swallowed the sun and become its master. "Langren, call ahead," Zheng rumbled to Twill up in front. "The shaman is collapsing." "I'm not," I said. "I'm fine. I'm still here, I'm not going." "Eh?" Twill glanced back. Yeah, she looks fine. Better than ever." "What are you?" "Call ahead," Zheng repeated. "Tell the wizard. Now." I didn't argue. Twill dug out her mobile phone, mercifully undamaged by her various trips into the water, and called ahead. By the time we reached the real number 12, Barnslow Drive, a welcoming committee was waiting for us in the front garden, lit from behind by a little warm light spilling from the windows of the house. Rain, Evelyn, and Lozzie all lit up with relief in their own separate ways as we came into view, but Pre merely stared at me in expressionless recognition. Rain called my name and Evelyn puffed out a huge sigh and quickly blocked Rain with her walking stick, stopping her from scrambling out of the garden gate to meet me. "Stay inside the property boundary," Evelyn snapped. "How many times must I say it?" "Oh my gosh, Lozzie was breathless, mouth agape, hands flapping wildly. Heathy, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Loz, what?" Rain's relief faltered. "She's so beautiful." "The shaman is unstable," Zheng called out. "Mooncalf, wizard, I do not know what she needs. And Uren Ju may still be after us." "Unstable?" Rain asked, deadly serious. "What does that mean?" "Hey, big girl, talk to me here." "He's volunteered for Heather's thing," Twill said, then growled at Badger to encourage him into the garden. Badger swallowed as he stepped over the threshold, sweating and afraid. "Right, yes. Yeah. Then get him indoors," Evelyn snapped. "Into the cellar, there's a circle waiting, I want him inside it 5 minutes ago." Then the Say Fox hopped up onto the garden wall, bushy and russet and proud. Evelyn froze and stared at her, dumbstruck and going white in the face. Preem stepped closer, as if ready to shoo the animal into the road. The fox flashed firelight eyes at the doll demon, perhaps in memory of how she'd been captured the first time we'd met. "It's okay. She's okay," I croaked. "She helped us escape. 7 sent her." Evelyn blinked at the weird, scratchy sound of my voice, but then just stared at the fox as it watched her in return. Zheng led me over the garden threshold too, which Lozzie took as her cue to bounce over and wrap me in a sudden hug, somehow avoiding all of my spines and spikes. Rain was stuck between Evelyn's distress and my unknown state. Twill set about prodding Badger into the house, but she was distracted too, fascinated by the connection between Evelyn and the fox. "I don't need your help," Evelyn hissed at it. The Say Fox turned in a circle on the wall, lowered her head, and let out a chitter-chatter yip-yap unmistakably both friendly and amused. Quickly she hopped down into the street and scampered away into the Sherrowford night. "No." Evelyn reached out one hand. Wait. But the safe fox was already gone. That's some serious helicopter parenting, said Rain. Oh, shut up. Evelyn exploded at her, whirling on the rest of us. We're still in a crisis. Now what is wrong with Heather? She went full squid girl, Twill explained. I could see it and all. Kinda cool, I guess, but she's back to normal now. I don't really get it. I'd fallen quiet as we'd entered the garden, growing less conscious, less connected, less here. Lozzie disentangled herself from the hug and leaned back, said something sweet, something positive, something affirming about what I'd done to myself, but the words no longer made any sense. Human-shaped shadows moved in the orange street lighting which bathed the garden, but my new body parts were so much brighter, fluorescing and strobing and glowing with energy from the star in my belly. Preem spoke, a bell-clear sound I would recognize anywhere, even on the other side of the abyss, and hurried voices followed. Lozzie's face fell as she grabbed and squeezed one of my tentacles, as if trying to hold it steady. Rain appeared by Lozzie's side, peering at me in concern, lips flapping sounds that might have been my name. In my blurring vision the tentacles seemed to multiply either side of them a dozen times, spinning out into an infinity of ruffles and tendrils and beautiful variations that I could iterate on forever. I felt myself flowing between one form and the next. Endlessly mutable. But that was impossible here, there was only one place I could be so incandescent. A snatch of Lozzie's voice filtered through, thick and muffled, like I was underwater. Heathy, you have to turn it off, you have to turn it off. You don't have to get rid of it because it's beautiful, but you need to turn it. I knew what she meant. She wanted me to shut down the trilobe bioreactor. Everyone's home. I said. Or, I thought I said. I had to repeat it twice before ape heads nodded in response. Safe. Safe, yeah, Rain's voice glugged above me as I sank deeper. Did good, you can stop now. Rest. But I didn't want to rest. The threshold of the house was only a few paces away now, my body dragged there unresisting, but I didn't want to smother the reaction inside me. This euphoria of being was too delicious. My body told me I could run and leap, burrow into the earth and swim the skies, leap into the abyss and back again, though a tiny, screaming part of me knew that particular urge was neither sane nor sensible. My new state of being did not have to end. I just encountered an example of where that path led. If I didn't stop here, would I become something like the big man? Unanchored in my physical body, without definition or concrete self-image. How long had it taken him to build his abyssal-crossing multidimensional self? Could I do that? I sensed that I could, that I was already slipping down that slope, toward the same old destination. The abyss was calling. I loved the way it felt. And I had still not forged my anchor. But on the sandy lip of that submarine shore, that drop into the infinite sunless depths, I found a new principle. I dug my heels in and raked my hands into the silt, turned fingernails to claws and hung on, rammed tentacles into every crack of stone that was not stone at all but maths and physics and starlight and thought. I anchored myself with the meaning of the very thing I had finally summoned into reality. I'd lit that reactor and built my new form to save Zheng, because I loved her. Homo abyssus me had been made whole and complete by that act of purpose. I was both abyssal and human, and would not be taken by one or the other. An act of love, practiced as an abyssal thing, served as the most sturdy anchor in all reality. I ripped myself up and out, back to full consciousness, gasping and spluttering through a waterfall of nosebleed in the front room of number 12, Barnslow Drive. Voices were shouting my name, somebody was propping me up, a ring of faces surrounded my sight. I held my hands up and half a dozen tentacles with them to make some space. Stop, stop, I'm fine, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, I'm. Heathy, you have to stop. Lozzie said, tears making tracks down her cheeks. Ease down, shaman, Zheng purred. You must slow the fire. Hey, Heather, a familiar voice crooned my name, brimming with confidence. Rain took my hand. Hey, You can relax now. I'm here. Rain cracked a beaming smile, just for me. Not a shred of doubt in her. You gotta chill out, though, she added. Oh, right, yes, okay, I croaked. 1 second. I think I can. And with a flicker of thought, before I knew what I was doing, I slammed home an array of biochemical control rods inside the trilobe organ. They snuffed the reactions out to a decimal point percentage of their previous runaway heat. It was like plunging every cell of my body into ice water. A gasp ripped from my throat, my pneumosomatic additions folded up and shriveled away, and the pain debt I'd incurred hit me all at once in a wave of bruises and muscle spasms and torn tissues. I was unconscious before I hit the floor. I slept for 16 hours. There was no fugue state, no dissociation, no out-of-body experience. I was very much inhabiting my own flesh, much to my discomfort. I was exhausted as if I'd run a dozen back-to-back marathons, and bruised all over in various new and interesting ways, several of which I hadn't even realized were possible. After I passed out in the front room, I spluttered back to consciousness a few seconds later and found myself in Rain's arms, but I had no recollection of who carried me upstairs. I was present but mute with dragging exhaustion as caring, tender hands cleaned the blood off my face, and dumped me gently in the bath to wash off the rancid sewer water. A swirl of voices and busy commotion filled the house, and more than once I snapped to awareness, panicking that we needed to defend ourselves. But every time, Rain's face or Lozzie's words would enter my senses and I would sink back below the surface. I think Preem saw me naked, but I was beyond caring, head lolling with sleep on a warm shoulder as somebody else picked me up and took me to bed. Sleep was deep and dreamless, the sleep of bodily heat. Been over you inch by inch, there's nothing broken, no permanent damage, you're just super inflamed and very bruised. Hey, but you know what? You already look better than when you got home. Sit up. Okay, I croaked. If I didn't sit up now, I'd lie here for the next 20 years. You want help? Rain asked. Please. Sitting up in bed was not the most difficult physical adjustment I'd ever made. I'd been slower, weaker, hungrier, and more tired on occasion before, but it was by far the most painful. A million tiny bruises leave the human body with no comfortable position to adopt, no hiding place from the irritating aches and pains and undignified fleshiness of being mortal. But as I winced and cringed at the pressure of Rain's hands on my oversensitive, raw skin, I didn't feel undignified. I felt whole. As she helped me sit up, my phantom limbs tried to help too, tentacles reaching out to brace against the bed and push the covers back. But those pneumosomatic additions had already folded back into incorporeality when I'd switched off the bioreactor. Their efforts served only to pull on the already abused muscles in my flanks, drawing a hiss of deeper pain from my throat. I liked that pain. I valued it. For the first time ever, it was not a reminder of what I yearned for, not a source of abyssal dysphoria. The pain was proof of what I was, no matter that most of Homo abyssus was currently tucked away for safety. Only most. As I finally reached a sitting position and Rain held me gently, I placed both my hands over my own abdomen, and felt the residual heat banked inside. The trilobe reactor organ was still in there. Not a ghost of abyssal body image and phantom pain, not a pneumosomatic blueprint waiting to be resummoned like my tentacles, not a hypothetical piece of impossible biology. When I'd slammed the biochemical control rods into their metabolic channels, the reactor had switched over into a self-sustaining mode. It was part of my body now, an internal organ, and I could not truly switch it off, any more than I could quieten the beating of my own heart. Hey, Heather. Rain murmured very gently. I blinked. Ow, even my eyelids ached. How was that possible? And came around from my self-directed awe. It feels good to be, I croaked. Rain was standing next to the bed, ready to catch me if I collapsed, backlit by the sunset on the other side of the window. Zheng was sat on the floor with her legs stretched out in front of her, leaning against the wall. She was half naked from the waist up, one arm and her flank wrapped in bandages and gauze, over the wounds the big man had left on her. Clearly her own supernatural healing factor wasn't quite enough, and needed a tiny bit of helping along by modern medicine. But even the sight of her almost topless wasn't what stopped my words. A dog was sitting on the foot of the bed. Small and round, brown-furred, with stubby little legs. It had its tongue out, panting softly, looking at me with friendly curiosity. "I am hallucinating a corgi," I croaked. "Oh, this is Whistle," Rain said. "He's Badger's dog. You would have missed him if you'd slept 5 minutes longer. He keeps doing circuits of the house and nosing in on everybody." Rain reached over and rubbed Whistle behind the ears. The dog certainly didn't seem to mind. I blinked 3 times, very slowly. "Badger's dog. A last request," Jing purred. My heart juddered. "He's not dead, is he? Not after all that?" Rain laughed. "Nah, Badger's alive and well, so far. We stuck him in the cellar, but he's on real good behavior. Whatever you did, Heather, you really convinced him. He keeps asking if you're awake, if you're going to be okay. Made me mighty suspicious at first, but he means it." "That doesn't explain the corgi." The dog in question, rotund little Whistle, tilted his head as I spoke, ears flopping about. "Badger's 2 requests," Rain said. "He didn't want his dog to get left locked indoors if he never makes it home. So, if he well, you know." Rain sketched me a smile. "We'll take responsibility for Whistle. The second request is he'd like to see Sarika before you go to town on his head. We can do that. I think he's sweet on her." I sighed, my throat hurt, but never mind. "Rain, what I'm going to do to Badger might kill him. Or leave him as a vegetable. Meeting his dog does not make that any easier." As if he understood my tone, Whistle let out a curious whine. "Yeah," said Rain, with an exaggerated grimace. "Sorry about that. Can't leave the poor bugger to starve though." Rain was right, but I was too distracted by pain to focus on abstract ethical issues right then. I slowly gathered the sheets in my lap, closed my eyes, and started to drift off while sitting up. Then memory crashed back in. I gasped, blinked back awake, groping for Rain's hand. Whistle flinched. "Where's is everybody?" "Everyone is just fine," Rain purred, one hand gently on the back of my head. The slight pain was worth her touch. "Everybody's safe. He's not come back. The big man, he's gone." "No, shaman," Jing purred. Rain sighed softly and rolled her eyes, but she told the truth. There was a knock on the door, round about dawn. There wasn't anybody actually there, kinda spooky, and then Badger started screaming because he saw something outdoors. "But it seems our big fat friend can't actually get in here, can't violate Evie's boundary. We're safe." She gave me a slightly strained smile. "Twill's gone home. She wanted to stay, but she and Evie had a bit of a set-to, 'cause Twill's got classes this morning. But no worries, she's been texting Evie all day to let us know she's safe. Lozzie's somewhere, doing cooking," Jing purred. "Ha. Yeah. Tenny wanted to snuggle with you, but we thought it may be best to leave you untouched for a bit, so she's downstairs with Lozzie. Evelyn's been wondering about that fox all day, but she's doing fine. Kim's still at work, almost none the wiser, but we've had her checking in. Seems like Mr. Blobby only cares about Badger. We made a phone call," I croaked. "Evelyn said things, I was worried." "Yeah, we heard the whole story from Twill, it's cool. You said some strange stuff down the phone at us, too, but it can't have been you." "Oh. Good. Good." I blinked, trailing off, then remembered. "Have you seen Sevens?" "Nah, not yet," Rain admitted. "Heard all that from Twill too, how she helped. Almost enough to get Sevens back in my good books. Twill and Jing both told me you went full-on Squid Girl transformation too." The shaman was glorious, Zheng purred from the floor. Which is the coolest thing I've ever heard. Rain flashed me a grin. Wish I could a seen it. Lozzie couldn't stop singing your praises. Bet you looked a right stunner. Oh. I felt myself blushing faintly and pressed my hands to my abdomen again. There's I made a reactor. In my gut. Pneumosomatic. Rain nodded slowly. Lozzie explained it, yeah. Well, kind of. You know how Lozzie is. Evelyn took a look too, but I don't think she understood it. None will, Zheng purred. None who have not dived in the dark. I glanced down at myself. I might have shaved years off my life with this. I don't even know how it works. But I had to. Had to. How do you feel though? Rain asked. Healthy. Hungry. My mind crept back to the events of last night. I'd fought that thing, for real, that towering mountain of greasy, pallid meat, amid the flooding darkness. A dribble of adrenaline leaked into my bloodstream, and I found my breath hitching, my gut clenching up, my senses opening. He's still out there, I croaked. He still has a claim on the worm, Zheng rumbled, and raised her arm with the bloody bandage. But not on me. Good, I croaked. The memory of biting into Zheng's wound was almost unreal. Had I really done that? A strange blush rose inside me. Little Heather Morel, acting like a cannibal horror from some shock movie. I hadn't really killed Uren Zhu. To kill such a thing was a feat beyond me. But I had won, in a very real way. I had come out victorious, in a contest between two vastly inhuman entities, and protected my family and friends. I was not insensible to the parallels, though I doubted the eye could be defeated in a fistfight, no matter how many tentacles I grew. You did it once, shaman, you can do it again, said Zheng, and for a moment I thought she was reading my mind, but then she continued. With no contract, Uren Zhu will leave. Yes, yes. Though it might be a little more difficult with Badger, I murmured, but Zheng's faith helped. There's a lot of work to do. I need to get up. If I even can. I sighed. On the foot of the bed, Whistle rose to his little doggy feet and hopped down to the floor, then slowly trotted out into the hallway. Heather, Rain said, bringing her face to eye level with mine. I am so proud of you. I averted my eyes. I did what anybody would do. I wasn't going to let Zheng go. She straightened up, and didn't press the point, but she and Zheng shared a private, knowing look. Are you here, shaman? Zheng purred a moment later, soft and tender. She levered herself up off the floor and stood over me, dark hair sticking up in every direction, clean from a bath earlier. She gazed down on me with tender awe and fascinated devotion, a look that still had the power to make me deeply uncomfortable. I did not deserve to be looked at like that. I was no messiah, no miracle worker, not somebody to be worshipped. But that wasn't what that expression meant, was it? It was the same way Rain looked at me, just filtered through a different set of needs and desires. It was love. Of course she's here, Rain answered for me. But Zheng blinked slowly, waiting. I pressed my sore hands to my aching abdomen again. Felt the residual heat of the reactor organ. My tentacles, my spines, my toxic defenses, my webbing and fins, exoskeleton plates and springy joint reinforcement, it all lay just on the other side of perception, folded away for now as an echo, but undeniably real. Homo abyssus had completed her metamorphosis, anchored herself with one foot in the real and the other foot in the deep. I'm here, I said, more to myself than my pack. For good. It wasn't until 5 days later that I felt confident enough to perform the vivisection. After our fight with Uren Zhu, who Rain insisted on calling orange juice, much to Evelyn's eye-rolling exasperation, I took the rest of that week off university classes, to heal and recover. I even officially and formally called in with flu symptoms, which wasn't far off the truth. Every muscle in my body ached, from the thick slabs of quadriceps and gluteus, through my underdeveloped abdominals and weak arms, right down to the tiny muscles that controlled my eyelids, the slow squeezing tube of my esophagus, and the delicate muscles between my fingers and toes. Even my tongue and jaw ached, along with the narrow anchor muscles up the sides of my skull, which made eating difficult for the first day or two. But I still felt terribly guilty for skipping class. My well-trained, good girl upbringing did not relent for anything, not even abyssal euphoria. I could still go to class, I protested in a raw voice that next morning. I'm not weak, I can stand and walk. Yeah, sure, while wincing and shaking with each step, Rain said. It just hurts. Alright, it hurts a lot. All over. But pain is just pain. I feel pretty good in every other way. Regular people get sick too, Heather. Plus, hey, imagine how we'd look. We'd make a right pair in one of your lectures, me on my crutch and you wobbling like you've just been screwed 6 ways to Sunday. The shaman can do what she wants, said Jing. Any divinely appointed monarch needs good advisors, said Rain. And I ain't advising, I'm making an executive decision. Heather needs to take it easy. You want to fight me over that? I'm not a monarch, I croaked, blushing. Rain. Jing rolled one shoulder and blinked a slow blink of silent acquiescence. The muscle soreness did not fade quickly, but transmuted down the ladder from spiritual concern to material reality, from omnipresent full-body ache into a more discreet series of very impressive bruises. My flanks blossomed black and blue where my tentacles had been anchored, and my skin broke out in dozens of tiny short-lived contusions wherever I'd sprouted spines. My knees and ankles grew stiff and creaky as the muscles recovered from my hasty pneumosomatic reinforcements and exoskeleton frames, and my skin was raw and red and oversensitive, an after-effect of how I'd flushed myself with warning coloration and defensive toxins. At least that last effect faded within 12 hours. It would have been torture otherwise, even dragging on a fresh set of clothes was like rubbing myself down with a cheese grater. Rain went to class as normal, because I made her go, but she hurried back as soon as possible. Jing stayed slow, stayed indoors, stayed close to me, like an injured bear in her den. She was still wrapped in bandages that Preem insisted on changing for her. My emergency field surgery had been a success, but even Zhang's post-human body took over 48 hours to close the supernatural bite wounds. She lingered at the windows, watching the streets at dusk and dawn, like a jungle cat waiting for a glimpse of her territorial rival. Tuesday I vegetated all day, after a night of sleeping like the dead. I lay in bed until noon, eating whatever was put in front of me, visited by Lazi and Tenny and little stubby-legged Whistle in rotation. Whistle didn't seem to mind Tenny. She even turned up once carrying the dog in her arms, with one of her silken black tentacles wrapped around his rotund belly. That was a good sign, if we did end up adopting the dog. But I wasn't up to thinking about that yet. If we did have to adopt Whistle, that would mean I'd failed. It would mean responsibility for another death. When Tenny offered Whistle to me on the bed, I had to turn her down. Pet, she trilled, trying to place the cuddly dog in my lap, lowering him in a clutch of her tentacles. His little legs waggled and he seemed confused but not alarmed. Stroke. Feels good. Good touch. Thank you, Tenny, I croaked. But no, thank you, it's too much. I can't. Can't, Pet? Tenny blinked those huge black eyes at me. I mean, I can't get too attached. I didn't mind the dog. I'd never been much of a dog person, always vaguely afraid of them as a child, but since Wonderland, they'd rather paled in comparison to what I saw every day, and Whistle was a very well-behaved, well-trained ambassador for dog kind, never barking or slobbering or nipping with his teeth. But I was not too up to explaining the moral and emotional intricacies of potentially growing attached to the pet dog of a man whose brain I was about to peel open, certainly not to Tenny. She was too young, still seemed like a child, no matter how fast she was learning and how quickly her speech patterns were maturing. Lozzie jumped in to save me. Auntie Heathy needs space. Lozzie chirped, and plucked Whistle out of Tenny's arms, giving the dog a quick hug before placing him back down on the floor. Lots of space, she's sore all over, up and down and in and out and no touchy-touchy, okay? Not without special permissions. Tenny blinked at Lozzie, blinked at me, and blinked at the dog as he trotted back out of the room. I don't think she entirely bought it. She was getting very perceptive lately. Lozzie then undermined her own lesson by having me turn onto my front so she could rub my back. I grumbled and complained and couldn't get comfortable, especially with my once again phantom limbs trying to help steady me. Lozzie weighed so little as she clambered up to straddle my backside, but as soon as she started squeezing and kneading the large, bruised muscles down my back, I felt such relief I had to groan into the pillow. It was still painful. Her hands hurt. But that was the point. Painkillers worked too, strangely enough. I can get you stronger stuff than the codeine, if you need it, Evelyn said to me in the kitchen that evening. I'd been working my incredibly slow way through dinner homemade chicken casserole with rice and lots of soft vegetables, spiced with paprika and cumin, one of Preem's increasingly complex forays into unsupervised cooking. Between the jaw pain and stiff bruising in my fingers, it had taken me an hour and a half to eat, even dosed with pills from Evelyn's secret stash. I could put it in a blender and drink it, I said. No, Preem intoned from behind Evelyn's shoulder. Her new maid uniform had finally arrived in the post, and she'd been wearing it all day. Evelyn refused to divulge how much the outfit had cost, but there was no way it was a standard off-the-rack imitation ordered from Amazon. Even the packaging had looked expensive. Between the high collar and the understated bust framing, the crisp, sleek skirt and the smooth lace at cuffs and collar and hems, Preem managed to look extremely pleased with herself even without an expression on her face. I sighed. Maybe I'll be better by tomorrow. What other painkillers do you have? I've got prescriptions for all sorts, said Evelyn. Tramadol or Vicodin at least. Or we could go ask Kimberly to share some of her special crop. Oh yeah, Rain said, feet up one of the chairs. Getting high'll help out with that sort of pain. I think I've had enough of altered states of consciousness lately, I said. What you've done to yourself this time is undeniably biological, said Evelyn. Inflammation, soreness, muscle strain. Which I for one find much preferable to you vanishing outside or bleeding from your face holes. Take some painkillers, Heather. Take it from me, there's no dignity in suffering needlessly. Evelyn was right. This wasn't spiritual, not another untouchable bruise or ghostly abscess inside my chest, not some mystery ache behind my sternum that medical science couldn't help. I wasn't exaggerating about the lack of weakness either. I felt strong, vital, and healthy, in a way I hadn't since the very first time I'd used hyperdimensional mathematics to force a slip, so many months ago now. Every time I'd used brain math since then, I'd come away with an aching void inside my chest, which never truly closed. The trilobe bioreactor had operated on more than a purely physical level, and finally filled in that void. I felt it all the time now, a brimming cup in my core. But this omnipresent pain was debilitating for the mind. I wanted to just sit or lie in a heap, not moving, and switch my brain off. I accepted a Vicodin. And we do need you capable, ASAP, Evelyn added. She glanced past Rain, into the utility room where the door to the cellar stood ajar. That idiot can't live down there forever. Hey, Evie, said Rain. Give her some time, she fought a giant monster, yeah. I wouldn't throw Godzilla at you and then expect you to seduce Twill 2 days later. Evelyn glared at her, unimpressed. Rain pulled an innocent smirk. I could do it now, I murmured, mostly to myself. Why did that prospect make my chest go tight? The longer I wait, the less time Maisie has. Heal, Preem intoned. Yes, heal up. That's not my point, Evelyn huffed. Look, it doesn't make any difference to our plans. Even if you extract the eye's embarrassing diary entries and incriminating phone logs from that fool's mind, it doesn't speed up our schedule any. Nicole needs to find Edward's house, and we need to steal our book back. Rain raised a confused eyebrow at Evelyn. Why the rush then? Because there is a condemned man in our cellar. He is waiting to die. Oh, I said. I may not be happy with what you're going to do, Heather, she said. But while I accept the necessity, it doesn't matter how well he understands the risks, or how disgustingly enthusiastic he seems about it. Yeah, no joke, Rain muttered. It's the only way, I croaked. It might help him, and it's better than the big man. Better than the eye. Yes, and I agree, Evelyn sighed. I understand. I get it. But you wouldn't let me be cruel, Heather. You taught me otherwise. I won't let you either. Don't make him wait too long. Get it over with. Wednesday morning I woke up with 6 tentacles wrapped around my lovers. Zheng and I had fallen asleep while spooning, with my backside tucked tight against her lap and one of her arms cuddling my tiny frame against her front. It was like sleeping with a giant hot water bottle which could also autonomously wrap around you, which was basically the best thing ever. We'd figured the heat might help soften my bruises, so Zheng had gotten the lion's share of me that night, and Rain had cuddled up in front of me, beneath the covers, holding my hands. I wasn't aware of what I'd done until the early sunlight started to filter through the curtain, gray and heavy with the threat of dawn showers. I'd blinked barely conscious, bleary-eyed and heavy-lidded as Rain had stirred and attempted to turn over in bed. Then she discovered far too many limbs holding her in a gentle embrace, and had shot wide awake, frozen in tense right in front of my eyes. Our Rain. I croaked in shared panic, not understanding. The tone in my voice must have woken Zheng as well, because suddenly my big cuddly water bottle was levering herself up, ready to fight off monsters or eat an intruder. Whoa whoa whoa, slow down, big girl, Rain said, one arm out. But she didn't look up, eyes fixed down on her own body below the covers. Shaman. Little wolf. It's okay, I'm fine, it's just us. I think. Rain rummaged below the covers. I felt her hand on my arm, first hesitant then firm. She squeezed and rubbed. Heather, that's you, right? This is you. I am sorry. I tried to clear my eyes, deeply confused as I wriggled my arm away from her. What's wrong? I don't. Zheng was chuckling low in her throat. She was touching one of my arms too. The shaman has sprouted in the night. Rain was holding one of my hands, and my other was under the pillow, but Zheng had one of my arms as well, and raised it to her lips to kiss my skin, but Rain was holding yet another arm, and somehow I was hugging her with 2 more and had one around her backside, and this was far too many limbs to account for. Oh. My eyes went wide. Realization dawned like a bucket of cold water over my head. I was suddenly very awake. Oh shit. I yanked my free hand out from under the pillow and patted along my face and shoulders. Had I sprouted spines in my sleep and hurt Rain? Was I covered in armor plating and toxins? I wasn't. Apart from the tentacles, the rest was just a vague phantom feeling on the edge of my conscious mind. Hey, it's fine, Rain said, right up close to my face. Heather, it's fine. It's just you. It's only you. I'm not meant to in my sleep. I didn't. Are you hurt? You cannot see them, can you, little wolf? Zheng purred. Sure can feel them though. Rain flashed a smirk. Especially the one between my legs. I blushed beetroot red and withdrew that particular tentacle with a slither across the bedsheets, though Rain playfully clamped her thighs around it as I wiggled free. I hid behind my hand, blushing and cringing. They are beautiful, Zheng purred. They deserve to be seen, little wolf. I'm sure they do. Guess this is a new perk of sleeping with Heather, huh? Please don't, I whined. When I concentrated, I could feel the trilobe organ in my abdomen humming away with a steady pump of energy, to keep these pneumosomatic additions fresh and healthy. It was spreading a subtle yet deep heat through my belly. A single biochemical control rod from the shutdown array had slid upward in the metabolic channel it occupied within the reactor, allowing the reaction to ramp up just enough to manifest my tentacles, but no further. I'd done it in my sleep, by instinct, because I'd wanted to hug Rain as well as Zheng. I wriggled one tentacle free and poked it out of the covers. Rainbow fluorescence cast slowly shifting colors over my pillow and Rain's face and the walls, brightening the room in the gray dawn static, the colors sleepy and heavy beneath the pale flesh. What a strange paradox, that I was casting bioluminescence that Rain couldn't see. I ran a human hand over it to be absolutely certain. Oh. Oh, okay, I panted, heart thudding in my chest. I could only thank God and Maisie that my tentacles were in their smooth configuration, not a barb or hook in sight, and no necrotizing or paralytic mucus smeared on Rain's vulnerable skin. Even fast asleep, my body knew to never to hurt my mates. When I'd been staggering home from the fight on Sunday night, unable to fold away my sharp edges and toxic spines, I'd still been flushed with adrenaline, ready to drive the big man off a second time if I had to. In fact, I'd only ever manifested my tentacles before in panic and self-defense, or for euphoric combat problem-solving. This was the first time I'd done it for a purpose other than fighting. The roots, buried deep in my flanks and anchored in already bruised tissues, ached like pulled muscles whenever I moved them. Here, little wolf, here, feel. Zheng guided Rain's hand, to touch what she couldn't see. I let out a little gasp and a not unpleasurable shudder of surprise, as Rain drew her fingertips down to where one of my tentacles thickened. Maybe not right. Hey, it's only us three in here, Rain purred. Are these erogenous, or what? No. And no they're not like that. I blushed so hard my throat turned red. I did my best to sit up in bed and push the covers down, airing out my pajamas, no matter the aches and sore muscles. My tentacles followed me up and out, spreading either side of me, drawing out the deep aches in my flanks. I am very, very, very sore. I really don't think I would survive a double. My eyes flicked from Zheng to Rain and back again. They shared a knowing look. Rain laughed. But I really was too sore. For now. Evelyn got me in a magic circle in the workshop 2 hours later, half naked and shivering in my pajama bottoms and bra, though by then I'd shut down the bioreactor and folded the tentacles away. But why? Lozzie asked from the sofa, both hands planted between her spread knees as she rocked back and forth, wispy blonde hair floating everywhere. They're so pretty, you don't have to hide them away, it's not like anybody's going to see if they wouldn't already be seeing them. Well, it does hurt, I said. The bruises, I mean. Evelyn huffed an unimpressed laugh down by my belly. Not surprising. You do look rather like a bad Jackson Pollock painting right now. Oh, thank you, I muttered. Lozzie pouted and puffed her cheeks out. That's not fair, even the bruises are pretty. They're proof of good things. Evelyn straightened up, putting her weight on her walking stick and lowering the magically modified magnifying glass she'd been using to examine my flank, where the bruising was most coherent and regular, from the anchor points of the tentacles themselves. The magnifying glass was a recent invention of her own, the lens itself painted with a magic circle of her own design and the lens frame covered in tiny eye-watering script. I caught a glimpse of the swirling, headache-inducing view through the lens, a vision of the floor behind her cast in psychedelic shifting neon, and had to look away. She winced and rubbed her hip, not used to bending over like that, but apparently unbothered by the effect of staring through the glass for several minutes. She wasn't exaggerating about the bruises. My torso and hips and most of my legs were covered in a patchwork quilt of visible bruising, busy turning dark purple, stiff and painful, though a few areas were already going green and yellow with the healing process. I looked like I'd been beaten. Get me in front of a doctor and Rain might get arrested on suspicion of domestic abuse. Which was no laughing matter. Yes, but they're also causing Heather considerable pain, Evelyn said to Lozzie, then added, for me, but you do look better. I don't think sleep-tentacling Rain has pulled anything loose. And the bioreactor? I asked. Evelyn wet her lips, meeting my eyes with an expression I'd seen on her too many times before, hungry curiosity and cold fascination. But this time it was softened by frowning concern. I've never heard of anything like it before, she said slowly. But then again, you keep doing things I've never heard of before. Doesn't believe I deserve to feel good about any of this, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong. Imposter syndrome for your own body. That's why I turned the reactor off and put the tentacles away, I'm worried it's going to fall apart again. Why do you have a Geiger counter, anyway? I asked. Evelyn shrugged. It was in the house. God alone knows what it was for. Get one out. Lozzie urged. Get a tentacle out. They're pretty. I want to touch one again. I sighed and awkwardly crossed my arms over my chest, feeling self-conscious. You sound like you're asking me to get my boobs out or something. Lozzie giggled, flapping a sleeve. Heathy. No. You do need to keep the bruises flexible, Evelyn said. Work the muscles a little bit. It'll help. She's not wrong. Doctor's orders. Lozzie chirped. They feel clumsy, I huffed, telling the full truth at last. Clumsy and less dexterous. In bed, when I woke up, when I was moving them around, they didn't feel the same as before. At first I thought it was because I was half asleep, but then I kept knocking things over in the bathroom. Like suddenly I can't use them right. Not an emergency, Preem intoned from by the door. We all stared at her. That's a good point, Evelyn muttered. Thank you, Preem. Preem nodded her head ever so slightly. Look, are we done? I asked. Can I put my shirt back on now? I'm cold. Of course, Evelyn said. She tossed the magnifying glass onto the table and eased herself into a chair, while Lozzie passed me my t-shirt and hoodie. I slowly and painfully tugged both on over my head and snuggled down inside the warmth, hiding my bruised body and my embarrassment. Whenever you've manifested your tentacles before, Evelyn spoke slowly, thinking with each word, it's always been in a crisis. Correct? Unless you and Rain have been up to some truly degenerate activities behind closed doors. I think she was trying to soften the seriousness of the subject, but I didn't laugh. I blushed and hid behind a hand. Oh, Evelyn said, voice gone hollow. Okay, no, I don't need to know that. That was a joke. We haven't. I blurted out. But you saying it as a joke is bad enough. Lozzie was giggling so hard she had to fling herself back onto the sofa and bury her face in the cushions. Evelyn cleared her throat and held up both hands, but embarrassment at her own joke had ruined her composure, and she couldn't locate the start of her next thought. Only in a fight? Preem said, coming to the rescue with her sing-song silver bell voice. Yes, exactly. I nodded, fighting down the blush that had risen at the unspeakable yet intriguing suggestion. Every time I've made my tentacles real, it's always been in a fight, or a crisis, and I've used them right away. The most I'd gotten out of them in the past, before Sunday, was perhaps a few minutes. And on Sunday it was all fight and then aftermath. But this morning, I don't know how long they were active. It could have been hours. You may not be used to them, Evelyn said, when you're not using them on instinct. I nodded. She had a point. When I'd woken up with my tentacles all manifested, it had felt very right to be that much closer to the shape my abyssal memories said I should be able to adopt. But a hand can feel right to possess, yet still be clumsy. Then you do need to get them out. Lozzie bounced to her feet and wrapped her arms around my chest from behind, in a hug. Somehow she didn't aggravate a single bruise. "Are you going to use the tentacles on Badger?" Evelyn asked. I blinked at her in white-faced incomprehension, mouth agape, almost offended. Evelyn, excuse me." Evelyn gritted her teeth. "I mean to perform the vivisection, not whatever you were thinking." "Oh oh. Oh. That makes much more sense. I'm sorry." At the word of vivisection, Lozzie had let go of me and flopped back into the sofa. She began humming loudly, and buried her head in the cushions again, swinging her legs back and forth. She didn't want to hear this. Didn't want to think about it. Neither did I, but it was my responsibility. I glanced over at the open door to the kitchen. We hadn't sequestered ourselves away for this. Rain was at class and Zheng was napping and Tenny was playing video games upstairs, and then beyond that, to the utility room at the back of the house. I couldn't see the cellar door from here, but I knew it was standing open too. Down there beneath the floors, Badger was asleep or reading a book, or perhaps watching the old television we dragged down there for him. We weren't keeping him tied up and handcuffed in the cellar. He was no Amy Stack. We'd only kept him confined for the first day, until Evelyn had a chance to make sure he wasn't carrying the magical equivalent of a cranial bomb, and Rain had decided his earnest awe of me was not an act. He'd seen me fight Uren Zhou and watched me bite out Zheng's infection, and in a way, I had rescued him. That had changed something about his priorities, but I didn't yet understand what. Perhaps I would never know. Perhaps I would flay his mind before he got a chance to tell me. But he'd requested to stay down in the cellar, sleeping on the camp bed Rain had dragged out of storage, petting Whistle and awaiting my inevitable attentions. Perhaps it was penance. More likely it was fear. He'd seen something out in the streets beyond the house, twice, once as a vague impression and the second time as an actual fat man who'd been standing and watching the house, not headless, just a very obese human. It could have been a coincidence, but as soon as we opened the front door, the fat man had vanished. Uren Zhou, waiting for him. The big man was not bothering with the rest of us, but he was waiting for Badger. Though I had my suspicions. If I stepped outdoors, it might follow me or watch me but not challenge me. This was my territory, I'd made that clear, but this rival predator would wait forever for his target. Zheng had taken to shadowing Badger whenever he emerged to use the bathroom, and Rain and Evelyn had both spoken to him multiple times. Kimberly made herself exceptionally scarce. She informed us she'd not had much contact with Badger while they were both in the cult. He'd been several levels above her, not a real mage but somehow important, but she still didn't want to see or meet or even hear anybody who had been involved in the Sherrowford cult ever again, as long as she lived. I had a mind to grant her that safety, as much as we could. I had not been downstairs to see Badger either. I'd heard him, though. We'd all heard him. Badger suffered the most unimaginable night terrors, full-on screaming fits and somnambulant flailing and falling out of bed, though no actual sleepwalking. He needed constant mental occupation when awake, which is why Zheng had carried the old telly down there, and we'd given him a pile of books and let him keep his mobile phone. Any unguarded mental moment was another opening for the eye to torture him, trying to get him to do something he couldn't. Last Rain had told me, he was watching the whole of Dark Shadows from beginning to end, some American soap opera I'd never heard of. We'd ruled out drawing the fractal on his skin, even as a compassionate measure. After what had happened to the cult, when they'd used the fractal to attempt negotiation with the eye, we thought it too risky. Well? Evelyn prompted when I didn't reply. Are you going to use the tentacles on him or not? Maybe. I gathered my wits, then hugged myself through my hoodie. Wished Rain was here. Honestly, I don't know. I won't know until I begin. You don't know? Evelyn asked, then sighed heavily. Heather, how long is the man supposed to wait? He's on death row. I could do it right now, if I was hurting less, I said. A few more days, at most. Plus, we still need to convince Sarika to come see him. Don't we? Maybe we should respect her wishes, Evelyn said. We keep using the word vivisection, I said, in a naked attempt to avoid the actual problem. But that's only a metaphor. What I'm going to do to him is primarily hyperdimensional mathematics. Very similar to what I did with Sarika, in fact, but with the added complication that the I is technically still in him. Connected to him. Somehow. I'll need to be ready, for contact, maybe. My tentacles are a secondary issue. Evelyn raised her eyebrows in sardonic disbelief. Need I remind you this all started when you got your tentacles out in the middle of the park? What were you going to do with them, tickle a cultist into submission? As if roused by thinking about them, my 6 phantom limbs rose up from my sides, forcing a wince from me as the muscles inside my torso adjusted to support structures which were not there right now. Of course not, Evie. I'm serious. You got the tentacles out. You were going to trepan one of them. That was only instinct. I'm not going to crack open his skull and root around in his brain, not literally. The tentacles might just provide some I don't know. Some kind of catalyst component. A stronger connection. I know they can pass through flesh if they have to. Tenny did that once, with a person's head, but... So maybe you will have to get physical, Evelyn finished for me. Why are you so insistent on this? Liar, Preem intoned. Yes I am. Don't use that language for yourself. Evelyn stamped with her walking stick. I want you to be prepared for this, Heather. Doing everything last minute, running on instinct, that might work in a fight, but not for this. If you have to stick your fingers into his actual brain, whether you're reaching through his skull or boring a hole in it, I don't care which, I want you to be ready. I do not want you to be consumed by guilt if you kill this man. And then blame yourself for being underprepared. Stop avoiding the practicalities. I averted my eyes. Behind me, Lozzie had stopped humming, hiding beneath the cushions like a burrowing ferret. But I could tell she was listening now. I don't know if I could do that part, I muttered. I can do the brain math, but... Then I suggest you get some practice in, Evelyn said. I puffed out a humorless laugh. Practice brain surgery. On what? You. Whistle. Myself? Not brain surgery. Basic dexterity. And we do have somebody you could learn from. Cheek, Tenny trilled. Rain drew a sharp breath through her teeth. Oh, she's got you dead to rights there, Heather. I frowned at the board, holding my hands clasped in my lap. On the other side of the kitchen table, Tenny started to bob and weave in her seat, rocking like Lozzie sometimes did. A playful smile spread across her mouth as she watched me think, those huge pelagic eyes fixed on my face rather than the board and the pieces between us. It's check, not checkmate, Evelyn supplied. Lozzie scolded, a finger to her lips. Let Heathy think. Evelyn rolled her eyes and hid her mistake behind a long sip of post-dinner tea. But she couldn't keep her mouth shut. Watching Heather lose to a child over and over is like pulling teeth. You don't have to watch, I muttered. And this was your suggestion in the first place. I didn't suggest playing a game you have no hope of winning. Hopa, Tenny said in her fluttering voice, leaning toward Evelyn's chair. 2 extra tentacles slid from their hidden sheaths in her shoulders, beneath the white fluffy layer of her flesh cloak wings. Black and silky, they waved through the air toward Evelyn, who made a valiant effort to stay still and calm. Yes. Evelyn said, somewhat strained. But Tenny stopped short of patting Evelyn's shoulder with the tentacles, making a sort of blinking, tilting expression which meant she'd remembered or realized something. Auntie Evie, not touching, she announced, and mimed patting the air instead, much to Evelyn's visible relief. Good girl, Tens, Lozzie stage whispered. Thank you, yes, Evelyn said. But what was your point? Heath can win, Tenny trilled. Exactly my point too. Evelyn cleared her throat. Then, in the way one would indulge a precocious child, she pulled a very awkward smile and raised her cup of tea to Tenny. Great minds think alike. Great minds, Tenny echoed. One of her tentacles was still close to Evelyn after the air pat, and it quickly dipped into the mug of tea to steal a sip. Evelyn blinked and pulled the mug back, leaving the tentacle dripping brown tea, but Tenny was already making a weird trilling feathery sound that was probably a giggle. Wonderful. Evelyn pulled a face at the remaining liquid in her mug. Ten's is clean. Lozzie chirped. It's fine. Of course she's clean, Evelyn huffed. That doesn't mean I want to share her mouth gut tentacle. Tentacle flora. Assuming she has any. Oh, sod it. Evelyn threw back the rest of the tea. I'd been frowning at the board the whole time, trying to ignore the peanut gallery. As Evelyn downed the rest of her tea, the pieces on the board finally stopped conspiring against me and gave up their secrets. I can see the way out, I muttered and promptly banged my hands on the underside of the table. Ow. Rain started laughing. Are you okay, Heather? I'm fine. I tooted, and maneuvered my hands from beneath the table, my wrists bound together with the soft fabric belt from Evelyn's dressing gown. Is this still really necessary? Until you stop trying to move your hands before your tentacles, Evelyn said. Try again. I sighed and rolled my eyes, replaced my hands in my lap, and concentrated on moving a tentacle instead. It was after dinner that same Wednesday. Night was struggling to fall out in the garden, over the streets and houses of Sherrowford in spring. Sunset gripped the horizon with tendrils of orange and rose larger than anything I could ever hope to summon. For the first night since I'd started living at number 12, Barnslow Drive, we had the heating turned down to barely a trickle, the old iron radiators lying dormant and quiet. The first feelers of summer were still perhaps a month away, but this house had been built back in a time when people still cared about proper insulation. Despite the missing roof tiles and cracked brickwork and old windows and creaking floorboards, it was still strong in its bones, still determined to shelter its human charges. I was still wearing my pink scaled hoodie, but I'd gone down to only one t-shirt beneath. We'd pushed aside the dinner detritus of dirty plates, and set up the chessboard in the middle of the table. Then I'd sat there for 20 minutes, making everybody else simultaneously very bored and a little worried, as I'd closed my eyes and concentrated on easing a single biochemical control rod out of its metabolic channel inside my reactor organ. I could have just slammed the whole thing onto full power. As instinctive as taking a deep breath, but half the purpose of this exercise was to consciously discover the breakpoints. I'd edged the trilobe organ into throbbing, pulsing life in operation which felt like trying to pluck a single eyebrow hair freehand, with a pair of kitchen tongs, in the dark. But I'd stuck with it, until a faint blush of heat spread through my abdomen, enough to make me purr with pleasure. Summoning the two tentacles had been easy by comparison, a simple flicker of hyperdimensional mathematics, not even complicated enough to cause a nosebleed. Though I had experienced a brief stabbing headache behind my eyes. The pain was worth the euphoria, as they had arced out either side of me, beautiful and strong and perfect. Lozzie had oohed and awed at them, wide-eyed and smiling like she was watching the sunset out in the garden. Zheng had nodded silent approval, then stalked off to watch the street from the windows. Preen had acknowledged nothing, and Tenny had watched my movements like a squid meeting another squid in the dancing ocean sunlight, trying to follow along with the motions of my tentacles. I'd positioned one above the chessboard, concentrating hard on the action of curling the smooth flesh and the muscle inside. The other had gone into Lozzie's lap, so she could massage it. A little deal we'd made, to help alleviate the deep bruise pain in my sides. She had to let off after a few minutes though. I couldn't concentrate on the chessboard, having the tentacle needed was like getting a foot rub, it felt too good and made me want to go to sleep. Tenny made the first move, inching a pawn forward. I watched very closely as her tentacle tip curled around the chess piece, then attempted to mimic her. We'd chosen chess specifically to distract my conscious mind between each move. It was one thing to prioritize my tentacles in a fight or a crisis or in a moment of fear, when abyssal instinct was concerned with pure survival, but it was another thing entirely to use them for delicate, complex motions when I was relaxed and safe, while considering a difficult problem. We couldn't do brain surgery, but this was the next best task. After all, to last even a few moves against Tenny did require exceptional concentration. I was no strategist, that was Evelyn's department, and I had not exactly played much chess before, so I had to do a lot of concentrating. It must have been a strange experience for Evelyn and Rain. Whenever I made a move, to them, the chess piece seemed to float. I recommend never doing this in public, Evelyn muttered as I made my first move. You look like you're using telekinesis. You'll freak out the whole country. I had since lost 5 times in a row, and bashed my hands and wrists into the table about quadruple that number. And I kept knocking the pieces over. TCH. I tooted as the curling tip of my tentacle fumbled the rook piece I'd been trying to move to block Tenny's check. It fell on its side and rolled away. I tried to grab it, whacked my hands on the table again, and not only did I not catch the piece, but also managed to knock over 2 pawns with the flailing end of my tentacle. Oh, bum! I swore, losing my temper. The rook rolled off the board and off the edge of the table. Rain caught it before it hit the floor. Hey, Heather. She held the fallen castle piece out to me, smiling a comforting smile. Relax, take a deep breath. Here, try to take it out of my hand instead. I can't do this. I whined, then felt terribly guilty, because Rain didn't deserve my anger. I rubbed my face with both my hands, still trailing the belt from my wrists. I keep trying to copy what Tenny does, but it's not working, I don't have any fine control. And I'm still sore all over, doing this hurts. My tentacles aren't meant for this human scale stuff, they're apparently only good for beating up monsters and hurting people. I huffed. Not that I mind. Still feels right to have them. Rain smirked. I wouldn't class that one between my legs this morning as beating up monsters. Rain. I squeaked. Evelyn rapped the table with her knuckles and gestured at Tenny. There is a literal child in the room, Rain. I will hit you with my walking stick. I will. Lozzie wasn't exactly setting a good example either, giggling like mad behind the ends of both her sleeves. Rain cleared her throat. Sorry. I forgot. It's all right, Tens, Heather and I were just cuddling this morning. Tentacles are good for cuddles, you know that already. Cuddle. Tenny trilled. 4 of her tentacles snaked over to Lozzie and gave her a hug, all while Tenny was looking the other way. I had to avert my eyes, fuming with unreasonable and irrational envy of her easy dexterity. Heather, Evelyn said, in a much softer tone than the one she reserved for Rain. Do you know how long it took me to learn to walk again? My envy faded with sputtering shame. No. No, I don't believe you've ever told me that, Evie. I'm sorry. 2 years, Evelyn said quietly. And I had to relearn periodically as I grew up, whenever I needed a larger replacement. Her free hand wandered down to where the socket of her prosthetic leg cradled her thigh, beneath her comfy skirt. I noticed Lozzie staring with innocent, blinking interest. This will not come quickly, and it will not be easy. I took a deep breath. I know that. But I only have a couple of days, yes. The point of this is to be ready for A surprised squeak escaped my throat and a sudden embarrassed blush rose up my cheeks. Tenny had wrapped one of her tentacles around my own, curling around and around as if braiding them together. She was gentle, but it was still like linking arms without warning. Tenny, what? Here. Here, here. Here, she trilled, and guided me toward Rain's hand. She acted as a living crutch for the direction and support of my own tentacle, the equivalent of a person reaching over from behind my back to correct my grip. Together, we plucked the rook from Rain's waiting hand, and placed it back on the chessboard, blocking Tenny's check attempt. She smiled at me and waggled her head side to side, her feathery antennae twitching. Thank you, Tenny. Thank you. Maybe you can show me how. Tenny nodded, and set about picking up the 2 toppled pawns as well. Over on the kitchen counter, Evelyn's mobile phone rang suddenly and softly. She frowned at it, but Preem was already picking it up and handing it to her. "Answer," Preem intoned. "Hey, is it Nikki?" Rain asked. "She found anything?" "No," Evelyn said at length, frowning at the phone screen. Tenny and I were concentrating together on moving another chess piece, but something in Evelyn's voice made me look over at her. She pressed the answer call button and held the phone to her ear. "What do you want?" A long pause. Rain and I shared a look. Lozzie fussed about with 2 of Tenny's tentacles. "Calm down," Evelyn said eventually, rolling her eyes, not sounding very placatory at all. "No, he's still alive." Another long pause. "Oh, that changed your tune, did it? Like you deserve to." Saturday then." Alright, no I don't care, I'll put her on." Evelyn held the phone out to me, looking very unimpressed. "Me?" I asked. "It's Sarika. She's changed her mind, wants to see Badger. Preferably before you operate on him, I assume." She pursed her lips down at the phone. "Careful, she's doing crocodile tears."